We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founding.
It's no secret that a massive shift in global economic power is underway from west to east. But the question is whether the old developed economies are ready for the consequences of that change.
We've got to give them a stake in creating the kind of world order that I think all of us would like to see.
Are we at one of those moments in history in which there is the necessity for a new world order? A, because of what's taken place in the Middle East, the rise of different kinds of groups, and B, what's happened in Asia, meaning that there has been a shift from the west to the east.
There's a need for a new world order, but it has different characteristics in different parts of the world.
Are you optimistic a global system can happen from what we've heard so far?
It could happen, and in fact it's in the works.
Issues, but they really are issues of the construction of a new world order. That's what this is about, and that's the sort of dialogue the Chinese are generally good at. And so a partnership between us is essential. A conflict between us is going to exhaust us both in tactical exercises that cannot be conclusive.
Order could satisfy both.
It has to satisfy both, because otherwise it will lead to tensions that will exhaust us both.
Much of the turmoil we see on the planet today is a response to a power shift of rising economic prosperity from the west to the east. 3/4 of the world's energy resources are in Eurasia, and whoever ultimately controls these resources will lead the world into a new era of consolidation, a new world order. Regime change in the name of democracy and the war on terror has placed the United States and its allies in key strategic Eurasian regions. Welcome to the birth pangs of a new world order.
Leaders and dignitaries of the European Union, representatives of our NATO alliance, distinguished guests. We meet here at a moment of testing for Europe and the United States, and for the international order that we have worked for generations to build.
Never before has a new world order had to be assembled from so many different perceptions or on so global a scale. nor has any previous order had to combine the attributes of the historic balance of power system with global democratic opinion and the exploding technology of the contemporary period.
This is the world you are graduating into. This is what I want to talk about today with you for a few minutes. I believe we, and particularly you, your class, has an incredible window of opportunity to lead in shaping a new world order for the 21st century in a way consistent with American interest and the common interest.
These troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order can emerge, a new era, freer from the threat of terror, stronger in the pursuit of justice, and more secure in the quest for peace. An era in which the nations of the world, East and West, North and South, can prosper and live in harmony. 100 generations have searched for this elusive path to peace, while 1,000 wars raged across the span of human endeavor. And today that new world is struggling to be born. A world quite different from the one we've known. A world where the rule of law supplants the rule of the jungle. A world in which nations recognize the shared responsibility for freedom and justice.
A new world order is emerging, and with it the foundations of a new and progressive era of international cooperation. We have resolved that from today we will together manage the process of globalization to secure responsibility from all and fairness to all.
There also exists an extraordinary opportunity to form for the first time in history a truly global society.
I've been a member of this committee for many years, and I have never seen anything as disgraceful and outrageous and despicable as the last demonstration that just took place about, you know, you're going to have to shut up or I'm going to have you arrested.
The ideology of the unification of mankind under one religious, economic and political umbrella has existed since the days of Babylon, when Nimrod built an epicenter of civilization reaching for the sky. United States politicians have demonstrated an almost fanatical zeal in a race against the clock to institute policies asserting US superiority. Nations such as China and Russia are forming re-evaluated alliances and are challenging US hegemony. There is also a religious aspect as well. Behind the scenes, Roman Catholicism has allied itself with the United States and the European elite to ensure Roman Catholicism, with its 1.2 billion members, is the head, not the tail, of the New World Order. Islam is the rival, with almost 1.6 billion members, and fundamentalist sects like the Shiites not willing to be part of any world order.
What for? Well, the purpose is what the Roman Catholic system has all the time as her own purpose, is to infiltrate, to penetrate all the areas of life where the Roman Catholic can have control and access for the coming world government. What that means is, in preparation for that world government, the Roman Catholic institution, especially since the establishment of the Jesuit order in 1541, throughout all these 500 years, they've been in preparation and through infiltration and penetration of every level of society in order to take over the world politically and religiously.
These US politicians are heavily influenced by the military-industrial complex, as well as organisations such as the Council on Foreign Relations and the Bilderberg Group. But the rabbit hole goes deeper than that. US presidents are well aware of the inherent danger of being assassinated by an unseen power if they choose to go against the grain of a well-hidden secret organisation, hell-bent on absolute control. Whom is this hidden power lurking in the shadows? On November the 22nd, at midday, Lee Harvey Oswald, according to 4 US government investigations, shot John F. Kennedy in Dallas, Texas. The assassination of JFK has been enshrouded in mystery ever since the bizarre chain of events that occurred before, during and after the execution of one of the most loved presidents in the history of the United States of America. Let's expose who was behind this action and investigate the motives of a power working covertly to undermine not only the US government but other nations as well.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
There were multiple reasons why JFK was assassinated. The Vietnam War, the dismantling of the Federal Reserve, threatening to smash the CIA into 1,000 pieces, and JFK's speech on the separation of church and state, which displeased the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church. President Kennedy wanted to withdraw from Vietnam, and he, as president, began to de-escalate American involvement in Southeast Asia, but the superpower group was plotting his murder. Who was the superpower group that has avoided publicity after a myriad of deception all these years? Writer and philosopher Avro Manhattan had this to say: "The political and military origin of the War of Vietnam has been described with millions of written and spoken words, yet nothing has been said about one of the most significant forces which contributed to its promotion, namely the role played by religion, which in this case means the part played by the Catholic Church and a diplomatic counterpart, the Vatican. Their active participation is not mere speculation, it is an historical fact as concrete as the presence of the US or the massive guerrilla resistance of Asian communism. The activities of the last two have been scrutinized by thousands of books, but the former has never been assessed, not even in the summarized form. The Catholic Church must be considered as their main promoter in the origin, escalation and prosecution of the Vietnamese conflict. From the very beginning, This religious motivation helped set in motion the avalanche that was to cause endless agonies in the Asiatic and the American continent. The military arm of the Vatican, the Jesuits, who controlled politicians in Washington, wanted to continue the war in Vietnam, set up a Catholic power in Southeast Asia, and maintain their control of the international drug market that the Jesuits had held for over 400 years in the Far East. When President Kennedy stood in their way, he had to be removed. The Jesuits had John F. Kennedy assassinated. The day after Kennedy was killed, the decision to stop America's involvement in Vietnam was reversed, and the Vatican program continued. President Diem of Vietnam was a practicing Catholic who ruled South Vietnam with an iron fist. He was a genuine believer of the evils of communism and the uniqueness of the Catholic Church, and had originally been planted in the presidency by Cardinal Spellman and Pope Pius XII. He transformed the presidency into a virtual Catholic dictatorship, ruthlessly crushing his religious and political opponents. Many Buddhist monks committed suicide by self-immolation, dousing themselves with petrol and setting themselves on fire, protesting against the religious persecution of non-Catholics by the South Vietnamese pro-Catholic presidency. President Diem's discriminatory persecution of Buddhists caused mass desertions in the army and disruption within the government administration. As stated before, the second reason for JFK's assassination was his intention to eliminate the Federal Reserve. Colonel James Gritz explains, when Kennedy called for the return of America's currency to the gold standard and the dismantling of the Federal Reserve System, he actually minted non-debt money, which does not bear the mark of the Federal Reserve when he dared to exercise the leadership authority granted to him by the US Constitution. After the planned withdrawal from Vietnam and dismantling of the Federal Reserve System, which is not controlled by the US government and too often manipulates United States policy, JFK was a marked man. He further infuriated the Vatican with his separation of church and state speech.
I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, where no Catholic prelate would tell the president, should he be Catholic, how to act.
Kennedy was one of many presidents, kings, czars and emperors who refused to obey the Jesuits and was killed for it. The role of the papacy in the heinous murder and cover-up of this crime cannot be denied. The Vatican had the motive, the people in key positions to carry it out, and the people in key positions to cover it up. The Jesuits control the major secret societies, including Freemasonry, Skull and Bones, as well as Roman Catholic secret societies such as the Knights of Malta and the Knights of Columbus. The last 3 generations of the Bush family belong to Skull and Bones and are subservient to the papacy. Here we see George H.W. Bush also in Dallas on that tragic day when JFK was gunned down. Let's take a look at some of the people who were in key positions at the time of the assassination. Lyndon B. Johnson was Vice President and a Freemason. He was subservient to Jesuit-controlled elite after he was sworn in as US President following the death of JFK. Allen Dulles was a Knight of Malta and CIA Director from 1953 to 61. JFK fired Allen Dulles as CIA Director for the mishandling of the Bay of Pigs invasion and insubordination to himself. JFK stated that he wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it unto the winds. On November the 29th, 1963, President Lyndon Johnson appointed Allen Dulles to one of 7 commissioners of the Warren Commission to investigate the assassination of the US President John F. Kennedy. The appointment was later criticised by some historians, who noticed that Kennedy had fired him and therefore he was unlikely to be impartial in passing judgment charged the Warren Commission. Allen Dulles' nephew Avery Dulles was a Roman Catholic cardinal and Jesuit priest. John McCone was the replacement of Allen Dulles as CIA director from 1961 to 65 and was also a member of Roman Catholic secret society Knights of Columbus. McGeorge Bundy was the United States Security Advisor. He was a member of Skull and Bones. George H.W. Bush was, in Dallas, seemingly nervous in his body language, and he too is a member of Skull and Bones. John Edgar Hoover was director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and a Freemason. James Rowley, whose brother Francis was a Jesuit priest, was director of the US Secret Service from 1961 to 73 and was responsible for the security of JFK. Here we see the confusion, as the Secret Service are now ordered to stand down as the President drives into the line of fire. Normally the Secret Service would be riding on the back of the limousine, which has foot platforms and handles, as seen in this picture. The Secret Service driver William Greer made an almost complete stop in front of a gutter drain, which mainstream documentaries and accounts will never reveal. After the other assassins had failed to deliver a fatal headshot, and the last assassin hidden in the drain was successful, the Mafia too, no doubt, had a part to play in the assassination of JFK, as the CIA has worked with them on many occasions, and the Mafia gave plausible deniability to the power elite if the operation ever came undone.
People have given me a hearing without legal representation or anything. Did you shoot the president? I didn't shoot anybody, no, sir.
Hold it down. Has the gentleman been identified?
Yes, sir. He's been identified for killing the officer.
Right. Has any identification been attempted for the killing of the president?
Not yet.
Did you shoot the president? I didn't shoot anybody, sir. I haven't been told what I'm here for. Do you have a lawyer? No, sir, I don't. I like legal representation. These police officers have not allowed me to have any. I don't know what this is all about.
Kill the president?
No, sir, I didn't. People keep asking me that. Sir?
Did you shoot the president?
I work in that building.
Were you in the building at the time?
Naturally, if I work in that building, yes, sir.
Back up, man. Did you shoot the president?
No, they're taking me in because of the fact that I lived in the Soviet Union. I'm just a patsy.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
When the United States rules the world, the Catholic Church will rule the world. Nothing can stand against the Church. I'd like to see the politician who would try to rule against the Church in Chicago. His reign would be short indeed. Archbishop Quigley, 1903, The Chicago Tribune. The founders of the CIA, which replaced the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, were Harry Truman, a Freemason, Allen Dulles, Knights of Malta, and William J. Donovan, who is also a member of Knights of Malta. Even though Dulles was said to be a Presbyterian, which no doubt gave him more cover, Many, if not all, CIA directors since the creation of the CIA have had a Jesuit education or some connection to a secret society, Jesuit priest or advisor. Leaders of governments know very well a shadow government is watching, waiting for the right time to strike, gaining ground inch by inch, controlling men of influence and power by force, threat, intimidation or bribe. Even as US economic competitors such as the European Union were on the verge of disbanding, United States President Barack Obama strongly encouraged and advised the EU to forge ahead, expanding and consolidating European nations into one political and economic superstate. So it is evident that the United States government is not necessarily representing American interests of we the people, but rather we the powerful undercurrent of globalist elite. Many argue that a new world order will prevent wars between nations and make the distribution of food and resources more manageable. Hitler had the same goal. Totalitarianism always ends in the systematic abuse of the masses. George Orwell's novel 1984 is a fictitious story, first published in 1949, about a totalitarian regime which kept citizens in a state of fear under the facade of endless war. 1984 has an uncanny resemblance to what is slowly happening to our society: pervasive government surveillance, arbitrary detainment, and torture and mass media conditioning of the masses to a certain way of thinking. What Napoleon Bonaparte and Adolf Hitler failed to do in the quest for the unification of Europe, the European Union succeeded in doing through trade and diplomacy. As you can see, the EU headquarters building is nothing more than a replica of the Tower of Babel, giving the effect of incompletion. The Tower of Babel signifies the collective concentration of apostasy against divine statutes by many nationalities. As the advertisement poster states, many tongues, one voice, with 11 visible pentagram stars of the 12 that are thought to conjure up satanic power in the occult, and the 12th star is said to be hidden behind the structure. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, better known by its acronym NATO, is a multinational force designed and thought necessary to counter the military power of the USSR, communism in Western Europe, and nationalist militarism. Now that the Cold War is over with the Soviet Union, the new goal is the domination of Eurasia, outflanking Russia and halting any plans of Russian imperialism. NATO is now more or less an instrument of elite think tank groups such as the Bilderberg Group. The strongest influence within this military machine seems to be the United States, as the United Kingdom, France and Germany have a lesser but significant say. Gladio was a clandestine operation grafted into NATO a year after its creation in 1949.
Accused of false flag attacks in Ukraine. Coming up.
The third force in eastern Ukraine. Kiev copies George Bush's plans for Iraq. And mainstream hosts storm out of the studio.
Killing your own citizens, then blaming another nation to start wars called a false flag attack. The most infamous is Operation Himmler. Nazis murdered fellow Germans, then blamed Poland to start World War II. Nazis trained by NATO were the vile snipers during the Maidan protests who shot both sides, both the police and their own supporters. It helped spark the violence that brought the coup d'etat. Leaked images show Ukraine nationalists Una Unso being trained to use sniper rifles by NATO. These false flags, writes intelligence author F. William Engdahl, are just the latest atrocity in the documented NATO Operation Gladio. Decades of terror attacks that have killed hundreds throughout Europe have actually been funded and planned by the White House. Top-level officials in the government and the CIA have confirmed in what Wikispooks calls the most shocking story ignored by the mainstream. Gladio is admitted by former CIA head Bill Colby to be a major operation. Operations like the massacre at Bologna rail station, which killed 85 people and injured hundreds more. EU Parliament passed a resolution condemning the terror, demanded NATO stop and carry out a full investigation. The US simply ignored it. Evidence shows this US campaign of terror continues today, notes the world's leading scholar on Gladio, Dr. Daniel Ganser. FBI whistleblower Sybil Edmonds, who ACLU calls the most gagged person in US history, revealed the CIA's actually expanded the program internationally under codename Gladio B. The same professional snipers as in Kiev, writes Global Research News, have been found shooting both sides in countries throughout the world that offer resistance to the US. Political analyst Eric Draitser joins us. Really great to talk to you. What's going on? Who's behind the snipers? That they work in the service of Western intelligence. This is quite clear. Likely private contractors, private mercenaries who are paid to create this kind of chaos. Those who probably cut their teeth on the battlefields of Afghanistan and in Iraq, who now are essentially murderers for hire, who are sent anywhere where the United States or its allies deem necessary to create chaos. So you mentioned a couple of examples in Syria, in Ukraine, in Venezuela. We should also remember, of course, Thailand in 2010. We saw a very similar situation there. Egypt most recently as well. This is a standard tactic, create a casus belli for the United States to have a military presence for decades to come. The world's main instigator of false flags, notes the editor of upcoming book Flashpoint in Ukraine, Dr. Stephen Lenman, is the United States. The US hasn't been threatened with a real attack in hundreds of years, writes the author of Questioning the War on Terror, Dr. Kevin Barrett. The only way to force war on its population is through terror-inducing false flags. 266 American sailors were killed on the USS Maine in Havana Harbor using the slogan, "Remember the Maine." The establishment blamed an enemy mine, then colonized Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Admiral Hyman Rickover later revealed it had nothing to do with the enemy. The explosion came from inside the ship. The entire US Joint Chiefs of Staff called for another, quote, "Remember the Maine incident" with Operation Northwoods. Declassified documents show Pentagon plans to blow up a US ship, hijack passenger planes, down an airliner from the US full of college students, wage a, quote, "terror campaign" in Miami, other cities, and Washington, D.C. The false flag attacks must be, quote, "widely publicized in mainstream media to cause a, quote, "helpful wave of national indignation." The plans signed off by Armed Forces Chief Lyman Nemnitzer were blocked at the last minute by a horrified President Kennedy. It was opposition to out-of-control militarism, writes James Douglas in JFK and the Unspeakable, that Douglas says got Kennedy killed by the intelligence services. It is one of the versions for his assassination. Northwood's mastermind Lemnitzer was put in charge of NATO, where he, quote, "hoisted the black flag of terror in Europe under Operation Gladio," notes the book Gladio, NATO's Dagger at the Heart of Europe. Kennedy's removal left the path clear for successor Lyndon Baines Johnson to return false flags to center stage. Within less than a year, LBJ fabricated the attack that plunged the US into the Vietnam disaster. The president made up a non-existent strike on US ships in the Gulf of Tonkin and said, quote, "Our boys are floating in the water." The lie goaded Congress into authorizing war, killing more than 3 million Vietnamese and 58,000 US servicemen. President Bush Jr. told British Prime Minister Blair that if he couldn't get UN approval to bomb Iraq, he'd paint a US jet in UN colors and try to get it shot down over Iraq to justify invasions. In a bizarre parallel, Life News this week filmed Kiev now using these armored helicopters with UN insignia against civilians in eastern Ukraine. These are just the false flags that are on the record and officially documented. Some are reprinted in 63 documents the government doesn't want you to read, written by Vietnam vet and former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura. On the few occasions mainstream media let him speak, hosts react with disdain and even storm out the studio in fury at the suggestion their government could ever do anything like that.
Oh, come off it, Jesse.
No, not oh, come off it. Wait a minute. Every war fought starts with a false flag operation.
You can't, in all seriousness, sit there and try and make out anybody in the Bush
let me ask you this, Piers. Wait a minute.
Have you read the 9/11 report and you think it's a piece of fiction?
No, I believe everything in it. I believe my government's never lied to me, have they? Let's see, where should we start? The Gulf of Tonkin incident? I remember our president sitting on TV telling us our boys are floating in the water, and it turned out to be false.
And because of that, you'll never believe
but they
anything.
lie all the time. Have you been in government? No, I have.
All right, so that's for. So I've never been in the NFL, but I could watch a football game. Yeah. All right, Jesse, take care.
He's leaving.
For the public to fall for a false flag, mainstream media lies must be coordinated and complete. When the White House lied that Syria's government did the Damascus chemical attack, the entire mainstream media swallowed it whole without asking for a shred of evidence. Last month, US intel admitted actually NATO member Turkey had false flagged the attack, which killed some 1,400 civilians, to justify invasion. Not a single mainstream outlet reported it. Turkey's leaders banned YouTube last month after leaked audio of them planning another false flag to invade Syria, reportedly egged on by John Kerry. Turkey's premier confirmed the authenticity of the tape.
I'll send 4 men from Syria. I'll make up a cause of war by ordering a missile attack on Turkey.
Many times, Kerry has said to me, okay, did you make the decision to strike?
Mainstream as one coordinated a term of art that the Turks were just innocently, quote, discussing military strategy, rather than the appalling truth that Turkey's planning a terrorist false flag on their own land as an excuse to invade Syria, apparently encouraged to commit the supreme international crime by the United States Secretary of State himself. US-backed jihadi admits they're also taught false flags to destroy mosques, then blame Syria's government.
I was originally tasked with the destruction of mosques.
You destroy the mosques so you can put the blame on the army?
Yes, if a mosque is not destroyed, we desecrate it.
The massacre of Odessa this month, reports Counterpunch, has all the signs of a classic US false flag. Shortly after, dozens of CIA spooks were discovered instructing Kiev's junta how to act in East Ukraine. Pro-Kiev thugs were sent to the city of Odessa with these red armbands. But the bloodshed was sparked by this rooftop shooter in a red armband, slaying his own side. Duly provoked, the thugs went on to torch and murder dozens of anti-fascist civilians they thought were to blame for the shooting. James Corbett of the Corbett Report joins us. Really great to see you. Why does the US establishment behave like this?
It's important to understand the establishment as a collection of psychopathic individuals, and that's not meant as some sort of metaphor. That's meant as almost a medical diagnosis. There is a percentage of the population, it's disputed by medical experts, but somewhere between 3 and 4% is generally the figure cited, of people who have a medical condition where they are absolutely unable to feel the natural human empathy that we feel for one another and compassion that we feel for people in situations that are underprivileged or what have you, people who are in positions of pain or suffering. There is a percentage of the population that has absolutely none of those feelings, and these tend to be the people who rise into positions of power and prominence in power structures that themselves are designed specifically to inflict pain and suffering on others. So it is not a big stretch to imagine how psychopathic individuals advance in military or intelligence functions.
Tanks and armoured vehicles have now moved in to shoot more unarmed civilians. James Corbett notes these incredible atrocities seem intentional to justify NATO military intervention. Right on cue, this week Kiev officially asked for international military help in eastern Ukraine. The author of Questioning the War on Terror, Dr. Kevin Barrett, joins us. Really great to see you. What are the conclusions from Northwoods to Operation Gladio today?
We're learning more and more about how psychopathic so many of our leaders are and have been. Stories about Lyndon Johnson that I can't repeat on international media because they're so disgusting. Stories about the Bush family involving the worst, most despicable kinds of crime. It's become supremely obvious that a lot of the Western leadership is deeply corrupt. And I think that has a terrible effect on the larger society because it's natural for people to imitate those above them in the social hierarchy. So we, I think, need to rethink the process that we're using to put people into leadership positions military leadership, intelligence leadership, political leadership. And we need to think about coming up with a way to maybe administer psychopathy tests to people who are aspiring leaders, or otherwise vet people to try to make sure that people in the top positions have some kind of conscience. Because if they don't, I'm afraid things are going to just spiral out of control. Whole societies will become so corrupt that they will fall apart, and civilization itself will be threatened.
Dr. Barrett knows false flags only work when the public's unaware of them. Washington's blog reports that interest in false flags has gone through the roof, and interest's now highest in the US. Audiences for mainstream pumping false flag lies are in freefall. Channels like MSNBC shed half their entire viewership last year, losing another quarter just in the first 3 months of 2014. NATO leaders are now known to have mass murdered their own civilians in false flag operations like Gladio. Reportedly, the operation continues today. How many more victims will there be before the public finds out? Seek truth from facts. This is The Truth Seeker.
Mysterious and elite. For decades, some of the world's most powerful people have come together to form a secret society of sorts. But now some of their secrets may be exposed. Joining me with more on the Bilderberg Group is radio host Alex Jones. Alex, I'm wondering what you think about this. Does this mean that the ins and outs of the Bilderberg Group will become more mainstream now that this author is coming out to talk about it more?
Well, European Union Member of Parliament Mario Borghezio last year questioned in the Parliament why so many heads of EU positions were Bilderberg Group members. And of course, last year, Dutch Member of Parliament Harry van Bommel also petitioned to members of the Bilderberg Group who were in the EU government to explain themselves. So what's happening is more and more people in governments, in different European national governments and in the EU government, are realizing that the real decisions are being made at globalist meetings like the Bilderberg Group. And we wrote a story last week at prisonplanet.com titled Bilderberg Group, The Open Conspiracy, because when Jim Tucker was first reporting on this 32 years ago as a U.S. reporter, people made fun of him and laughed at him and said it didn't even exist. Major publications like the New York Times and Time Magazine said it didn't exist. Well, since then, the Bilderberg Group has been forced to go more public and admit that they covertly set up the European Union, that they do want a planetary government, that they do want world government. And so much of their agenda is now promoted by the EU and others. Herman von Rompuy, who's a Bilderberg Group attendee, and of course the head of the EU, has called for global government run by the very central banks that have caused the worldwide derivatives crisis. So yes, just 2 weeks ago, Zbigniew Brzezinski addressed the Council on Foreign Relations and said, for the first time in world history, the entire globe is politically awakened, not to the puppet presidents and prime ministers, but to the real power elite, and that their world government is basically in trouble. And the Council on Foreign Relations, people in the crowd looked very upset. So this Anglo-American Dutch power structure that's hidden in the shadows and use the energy of the U.S. and England to carry out this world government is in trouble, because the American people and others are waking up to the fact that we've been used as the engine of this covert empire.
Alex,
and so there's a major...
I want to interrupt you just real quick. I think you make a good point in talking about how it really did used to be viewed as sort of a conspiracy, and a lot of people didn't see the validity in talking about this as something that was real. But many of the predictions that the Bilderberg Group has made, especially relating to the economy and the financial meltdown in Europe, have been extremely accurate. Talk a little bit about that and how that has sort of altered public perception.
Well, sure. I mean, you get 150 or so, previously it was about 125, of the heads of Dutch Royal Shell, royalty, the head of the Dutch Royal House, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, all together is really a mafia commission meeting, and they're deciding on any disputes and the agenda for the following year, because they're already going in the basic direction they want to go, but there's minor tweaks going on. So 2 years ago, I traveled to Virginia and covered the Bilderberg Group, and the intel we got from inside was that Obama had been chosen and that Hillary was going to step down from the campaign. That was done 2 days later after we announced it. We were able to discover that the Bilderberg Group was planning to run gas prices up to $150 a barrel. People laughed at us. It then happened in the next year. The Bilderberg Group said that they'd made deals to have the staged collapse of the Berlin Wall. Jim Tucker reported on that a full year before it happened. Jim Tucker also reported from his Bilderberg inside sources that Bush was going to announce that he did believe in global warming and wanted carbon taxes. And that became a verified, documented truth later. When the Washington Post was announcing that the attack on Iraq was going to be 2002, American Free Press and others reported from their Bilderberg sources that the owners of the Washington Post, Mr. Graham, had attended and knew that it was going to be in March of '03. That was later confirmed. So yes, the Bilderberg Group is the highest level of world government, but they have their public propaganda that they put out at Davos and at other forums and events. And more, what the secret of Bilderberg Group is doing behind closed doors is more and more being put out publicly because they've now been revealed. They're having to admit their world government agenda, but they're putting a spin on it that it's good and humanitarian. And we cover this in my film, The Obama Deception. But yes, they're in a lot of trouble because the planet is waking up to their covert criminal operation.
Just very, very briefly, Alex, the secrecy and the privacy, how important is that?
Well, it's very important that Bilderberg keep its inner working secret. It's okay if stuff from decades ago comes out, but they don't want it, the new information to come out because their agenda can then be thwarted. Their main function now is vetting European, British, and U.S. politicians. That is one of their most important functions. More and more, they're being made not obsolete. It's just that the global pace has forced the Bilderberg Group to...
Alex, I'm going to have to cut you off. I'm so sorry. We are out of time. Always like hearing from you. But
the Bilderberg Group can be summed up in their goals and aspirations by looking at the founders. Joseph Ratzinger, who once studied to be a Catholic priest in a Jesuit seminary, was concerned about the anti-Americanism in Western Europe. He approached Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who then in turn contacted Paul van Zeeland of the Catholic Party of Belgium. Prince Bernhard contacted Walter Bedell Smith, director of the CIA, and facilitated guest lists through Eisenhower's advisor Charles Douglas Jackson, who was an expert in psychological warfare and director of the defunct OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, the forerunner of the CIA. So the Bilderberg Group founders consisted of royalty, intelligence service directors, a member of the Roman Catholic political party, and the influences of the Jesuit order Novitiate, Joseph Ratzinger. Enough said. NATO could also be said to be the New World Order enforcers, bringing the world into some sort of collective governance. How can war and collectivism bring peace and prosperity? We have already seen the fruit and broken promises of past leaders who each proposed a well-ordered utopia, such as the communist state, which has more often than not led to mass murder. Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong and Pol Pot politically liquidated tens of millions of people. Right-wing politics has left a trail of death, destruction and misery as well. Hitler, Pinochet and Franco murdered and brutalized opponents and dissidents, and as these dictators all had the blessing of the Roman Catholic Church, historically, the Vatican has always leaned to the extreme right of fascism, the ideology opposite to communism, for the reasons that the Vatican has a similar power structure to fascism, and that one of the main doctrines of communism is the denial of the existence of God, which leaves little room for Roman Catholicism. The ideological views of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, socialism and communism, were refined from such works as Plato's Republic, and were meant to create heaven on earth in theory. What happened in practice was misery and tyranny. Socialism or communism, no matter how it is expressed, is collectivism, and is or eventually leads to totalitarianism. Fascism is simply the flip side of the same totalitarian coin, but with room for a religious and political leader. Both ideologies are totalitarianism and lead to big brother government. You may have noticed how China is allowing more freedoms, becoming more capitalist and quasi-democratic. The United States has morphed into a strange mix of communism, fascism and capitalism. However, capitalism in the future will only be a privilege for the elite. The United States and many other Western countries are rapidly becoming police states with controlled media, owned by only a handful of individuals. Many Western government states and provincial governments are slowly surrendering power to federal governments, which in turn surrender power to organisations such as the United Nations, World Bank, IMF and trade unions. Sovereign countries will lose autonomy, and citizens will face laws that will deface individualism and be replaced by collectivism. For world government to grow, you need problems that need fixing. In reality, many problems are created, some are induced, and some naturally occur. The problem-reaction-solution model is the most effective strategy to create a new world order. Problems such as overpopulation, climate change, and terrorism are examples of problems the world's powerful bring before a pliant public in order to bring about the desired changes. The correct terminology is social engineering. The allied countries of the United States, such as the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada and New Zealand, are also rapidly losing personal freedoms and liberties, which might soon exceed the restrictions of communist China.
With all the attention placed on the NSA's mass surveillance of American citizens, it's easy to forget the other countries that are taking a page out of the agency's spy book. Just this past weekend, it was revealed that in 2008, Australia's surveillance agency shared information about the country's citizens with its most trusted intelligence partners. Perhaps the most concerning part of this recently leaked Snowden document was the discussion between these allies over whether or not to share the medical, legal, and religious information of Australian citizens. But this story is just a microcosm of the larger international spying cabal working together to peer into every nook and cranny of the world. So who exactly are these peeping partners? Well, they call themselves the Five Eyes, a partnership made up of intelligence agencies in 5 English-speaking countries: the US, the UK, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. And just like the Eye of Sauron, eyes see all, which is an especially appropriate analogy since The Lord of the Rings was filmed in New Zealand. But I digress. You see, the Five Eyes Agreement has been around since the end of World War II, but it was so secret that the program wasn't even disclosed to the public until 2005. On the surface, this treaty is just a friendly agreement between allied nations that it's essential to stopping global terrorism. But thanks to the Snowden leaks, we now know just what an asinine agreement it's actually being used for: industrial espionage and circumventing those pesky laws that prohibit warrantless surveillance of a country's own citizens. In theory, these nations are not allowed to spy on each other's people, but we all know rules are meant to be broken. In 2007, the NSA analyzed and retained any British citizen's mobile phone number, email, and IP address swept up in its enormous dragnet. Another memo dated from 2005 shows that the NSA was working on a procedure to spy on the other 4 countries. And while one sentence in the memo states that the US and UK will not explicitly target each other, the very next sentence says governments reserve the right to spy on each other's citizens when it's in the best interest of each nation. Well, that's not open to interpretation at all. Look, I think it's clear at this point that the myth of the American empire exporting freedom and democracy really means exporting surveillance and subjugation.
The meshings of fascism, capitalism and communism seem to be the cornerstone of the New World Order autocracy. Yes, autocracy, like the Roman Empire with a pope instead of a Caesar, but more on that subject later. Karl Marx raised some very realistic economic predictions of the future in his writings, such as when markets have become saturated, power must eventually go back to the state. For example, when everybody in the world has a pair of shoes and a mobile phone, the markets then become uncompetitive. Companies can only compete as long as they make a profit. When the profit is marginal or non-existent due to fierce competition or oversupply, power must eventually go back to the state. 3D printing will definitely speed this process along, and perhaps 3D printing will end up being regulated by the New World Order under license, especially in the case of guns. And the state will oversee licensed mass production. Interesting foresight by Karl Marx, considering we can see this happening in the United States and around the world. Many lines of business are ending up in the hands of a few. The Western economic system is similar to a giant Ponzi scheme needing new industries. Recently, the United States has even legalized marijuana in some states, and many European countries seem to rely on drug trafficking and prostitution to raise their GDP.
It's this simple, folks. If you believe the world's economy is a sound, solid structure, you are an idiot. And I mean that in the kindest way possible. But seriously, the entirety of our economy is a Ponzi scheme. And anyone with half a brain who spends about 15 minutes thinking about it will agree. And the Ponzi scheme is beginning to show some cracks. First, we had people losing their homes and savings because they were buying up crap they couldn't afford. Then we had governments bailing out banks and corporations. Now we have governments bailing out other governments. We perpetually finance the present with the promise of the future's prosperity. It's insane. At some point, the buck passing has to stop.
People are really showing which side they're on right now. This is the big move. And I mean, there's the headline. Pope Francis calls for new system of global government to tackle climate change. That's not an Infowars.com headline. That's in Time Magazine, Newsweek, the BBC. I mean, Lord Monckton, how do you square this?
What has happened here is that Pope Francis was brought up in the communist tradition of what's called liberation theology, which came out of the French universities, like so many other bad ideas, and it was taken back to Latin America by students for the priesthood who'd gone to study for university degrees in France. And of course, one of those was Pope Francis. So he is an anti-capitalist through and through.
The Jesuits are well aware that capitalism as we know it cannot survive for long. Technologies such as 3D printing and robotic automation could well make most of the workforce redundant. Power, to a large degree, would have to go back to the state, curtailing capitalism.
What are the chances a robot or computer will one day take over your job? According to one study, 47% of U.S. jobs have a high probability of becoming computerized. And recently, the Pew Research Center surveyed 1,900 experts who all agreed that automation and artificial intelligence will truly pervade our lives by 2025. But nearly half of the experts aren't optimistic about this automation at all. They say robots and other tech will displace blue and white-collar workers. Masses of people will be effectively unemployed.
Many dictators and ancient superpowers have had the same ambition of world domination, such as the Babylonians, Egyptians, Medes and Persians, ancient Greece, and the Roman Empire, and last of all, the Roman Catholic Church, which is simply a continuation of the Roman Empire that was authorized by the Byzantine or Eastern Roman Emperor Justinian I, 527 to 565 AD, after the demise of Western Rome. Eventually, the Roman Catholic Church was subdued by Napoleon's general in 1798, ending 1260 years of papal rule. Historians believe that the Roman Catholic Church killed upward of 50 million people. Later in history, the independent Vatican city-state was established in 1929 by the Lateran Treaty, signed by Cardinal Secretary of State Pietro Gasparri on behalf of Pope Pius XI, and by Prime Minister Benito Mussolini on behalf of King Victor Emmanuel III of Italy. Since 1929, the papacy has gathered momentum, and today is the most powerful organization on the planet. Vatican rule and infiltration is a growing concern within many countries. Every Catholic has a responsibility, obeying the Pope before king, president or country. So more often than not, a conflict of interest arises when a practicing Catholic holds any public or political office. In past history, the papacy used the armies of rulers and kings to procure her agenda and establish papal supremacy, most probably because of the cost. Some examples are King Clovis I, who enforced Catholicism with an iron fist, uniting the Frankish tribes, and King Philip II of Spain on the orders of Pope Sixtus V, sailing his armada to conquer rebellious Protestant England. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre and many more examples are all indictments against the papacy's religio-political agenda controlling kings. The Catholic Church has infiltrated the highest levels of government in many nations via the Roman Catholic secret societies such as the Jesuits, Knights of Malta, Opus Dei, Knights of Columbus and laymen too. However, the Jesuits knew that if they could commandeer agencies like the CIA, NSA, the FBI, the Secret Service, as well as placing Jesuit-trained and influenced directors in military and defence roles, the Vatican could ultimately control the US government, coercing other nations to comply with the implementation of the Vatican's New World Order. The Society of Jesus, better known as the Jesuit Order, is the right arm of the Catholic Church. The Jesuits were approved by Pope Paul III in 1540 to counteract the Reformation, but grew more powerfully pervasive than the Roman Catholic Church itself. The Illuminati were simply members of the Jesuit order who were disenfranchised from the Roman Catholic Church when Pope Clement XIV, by the brief Dominus ac Redemptor, suppressed the Jesuits on the 21st of July 1773. This was under the pressure of leaders of European nations for subversive actions against the state. The Illuminati was simply the Jesuits resurrected under a new guise and a new name. Some years later, the monarchs that instigated the suppression of the Jesuits were no longer ruling because of political revolutions that the Jesuits had conceived under the guise of the Illuminati. Pope Pius VII restored the Jesuit order to its preeminence in 1814. The Jesuits simply kept the Illuminati as a secret society controlling secular society, including education, Greek letter organisations like Phi Beta Kappa, Kappa Alpha Society and Delta Phi, and other secret societies such as Skull and Bones and Freemasonry. Now the Jesuits controlled both spheres, Christianity and secularism. The Jesuit order was extremely successful in its counter-reformation against Protestantism, as well as stamping out any papal dissent ignited by Martin Luther, who nailed the 95 Theses to the Wittenberg Castle door in 1517. But the Jesuit war against Protestantism has been going on for centuries, even landing on the shores of the United States of America, which was deemed a Protestant nation.
President Washington, that was the first president to be utilized by the Jesuits. If you were not aware of that, President Washington already was initiated by the Jesuits to bring about the first communication with the Vatican ever known in this country. From there on, President Reagan, to all this time, President Reagan has come to fulfill the greatest moment in the history of this conspiracy, because no other president has come as close as President Reagan brought about several things. One of them is the diplomatic relationship with the Vatican. Second, the preparation for the signature of a concordat between the Vatican and the United States. And if you want to know, this never took place overnight. President Reagan was prepared and is here for the task that is performing today as President of the United States by the Jesuits of Rome, and the time that he served as a star in a movie that was very well known and still being shown today, a very old movie about the football team of Notre Dame. New Doctrines. That's correct. This is the time that the first contact was made by the Jesuits with Reagan.
When Ronald Reagan opened diplomatic relations with the Vatican State on January the 10th, 1984, something that the American people had contested in former years because of the contrast between the United States, a nation of religious liberty, and Vatican City, a dictatorial state that claimed fascism to be more in line with her political thinking and tyranny of religious freedom. In 1989, the tearing down of the Berlin Wall was an example of the intimacy of the US-Vatican merger, with Pope John Paul II influencing both the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Soviet Union, which had long been opposed to Roman Catholicism and the United States during the Cold War. Time magazine published an article on the 24th of February 1992 about the alliance between the Pope and Ronald Reagan, President of the United States, ushering in a new era of US-Vatican relations. Henry Luce, a co-founder of Time magazine, was also a member of the Roman Catholic secret society Knights of Malta. The other founder died at a very young age, soon after the creation of the magazine.
I thought that it was a matter of real concern that planted stories intended to serve a national purpose abroad came home and were circulated here and believed here, because this would mean that the CIA could manipulate the news in the United States by channeling it through some foreign country. Now we're looking at that very carefully.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal?
We do have people who submit pieces to American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
At CBS, we had been contacted by the CIA. As a matter of fact, by the time I became the head of the whole news and public affairs operation in 1954, ships had been established, and I was told about them and asked if I'd carry on with them.
We have quite a lot of detailed information, and we will evaluate it, and we will include any evidence of wrongdoing or any evidence of impropriety in our final report and make recommendations.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to the national news services, AP and UPI?
Well, again, I think we're getting into the kind of detail, Mr. Chairman, that I'd prefer to handle in executive session.
Senator, do you think that you named the news organizations in your final report?
That remains to be decided.
I think it was entirely in order for our correspondents at that time to make use of CIA agent chiefs of station and other members of the executive staff of CIA as sources of information which were useful in their assessments of world conditions.
Would you say that continues today?
Well, I would think probably for a reporter it would continue today, but because of all of the revelations of the period of the 1970s, it seems to me that a reporter's got to be much more circumspect in doing it now, or he runs the risk of at least being looked at with considerable disfavor by the public. I think you've got to be much more careful about it.
How has the CIA interfered in the American film industry since the Cold War era till today? What Hollywood films have come to market carrying the CIA's message and offering a vicious and extreme image of America's enemies? Who are the enemies? Who are targeted for destruction by the American agents? In 1917, when the United States entered World War I, President Woodrow Wilson's Committee on Public Information enlisted the aid of America's film industry to making training films and features supporting the cause. George Creel, chairman of the CPI, believed that the movies had a role in carrying the gospel of Americanism to every corner of the globe. The Federal Bureau of Investigation established an office in the 1930s to bolster its image in radio programs, films, and television shows. In 1947, the Department of Defense followed suit, and now the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marine Corps, the Coast Guard, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Secret Service all have motion picture and television officers or official assistants to the media on their payroll. During World War II, Hollywood's contribution was to provide propaganda.
Hollywood's most famous movie stars leave the film capital to help the government sell war bonds. Irene Dunn, Ronald Colman, Hedy Lamarr, Greer Garson, all part of a contingent of some 50 screen celebrities giving their time and talents to aid the national war effort. The country has asked the people to invest $1 billion in 1 month to help pay for the war. And here's the start of the drive. Boarding a special train for Washington, they'll tour 300 cities from coast to coast. Go to any city that agrees to subscribe at least $1 million.
Buy a bond, and by, the bonds you buy'll bring you victory.
After the war, Washington reciprocated by using subsidies, special provisions in the Marshall Plan, and general clout to pry open resistant European film markets.
Every society to some degree has structural elements that want a particular representation of the individuals in society. The CIA's involvement in Hollywood goes all the way back to, not only Hollywood, it really starts in the media. In 1953, Alan Dulles created a department that wanted to really influence the media and the CIA. Carl Bernstein, of the famous Woodward and Bernstein journalist who exposed Watergate, he was actually the co-winner of the Pulitzer Prize in, I believe, 1973. In 1977, I believe, he published an article, about 20,000 to 25,000 words, titled "The CIA and the Media," and this was actually published in Rolling Stone magazine in 1977, and it really disclosed the sleight of hand that Hollywood had in influencing the media as a whole. Now, eventually, this would lend itself to Hollywood for obvious reasons, but there was actually in the 70s, Senator Frank Church headed a committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee, to actually look into the involvement, the extent of the involvement in the CIA in the media. We had William Colby and George Bush Sr. Come out and actually, sort of thwarted the investigation, and their logic was, their reasoning was that this would disclose some highly sensitive information, it would not be right for national security, a lot of the same issues we see going on today.
It is evident that the CIA promotes Catholicism through Hollywood. America is a predominantly Protestant country at 51%, with Roman Catholicism at 23%. One only has to think back to the overwhelming majority of Hollywood films involving Catholic priests. Public relations nightmare of Pope Benedict XVI and the ever-declining popularity of the Roman Catholic Church due to scores of sexual abuse cases, the Jesuits were summoned, and Pope Francis was elected, the first Jesuit to be elected pontiff. An Opus Dei member, Greg Burke, who previously served as a correspondent for both Fox News and Time magazine, was appointed the public relations advisor to Pope Francis. Ever since, Pope Francis has participated in cheap gimmicks and public displays of charity that have swayed public opinion to proclaim Pope Francis as the People's Pope.
When we die, Father, is nothing left. Ever since I was a child, I had a feeling that something is missing in me. I want to know why I'm here. Can any of us know that? Become yourself. Then God and the devil don't matter. I want to learn. I want to understand. Be careful. Can you find the force to enable these two quite opposite lives to live together in yourself? At any moment, the wolf can devour the lamb, and you must learn what it means to become responsible.
Zimbabwean dictator Robert Mugabe was raised a Roman Catholic and educated at Jesuit schools. One of the world's most prolific authors had this to say on the Jesuits: "There was no crime too great for them to commit, no deception too base for them to practice, no disguise too difficult for them to assume. Vowed to perpetual poverty and humility, it was their studied aim to secure wealth and power, to be devoted to the overthrow of Protestantism and the re-establishment of the papal supremacy. When appearing as members of their order, they wore a garb of sanctity, visiting prisons and hospitals, ministering to the sick and poor, professing to have renounced the world, and bearing the sacred name of Jesus, who went about doing good. But under this blameless exterior, the most criminal and deadly purposes were often concealed. It was a fundamental principle of the order that the end justifies the means. By this code, lying, theft, perjury, assassination were not only pardonable, but commendable when they served the interests of the Church. Under various disguises, the Jesuits worked their way into offices of state, climbing up to be the counselors of kings and shaping the policy of nations. They became servants to act as spies upon their masters. They established colleges for the sons of princes and nobles, and schools for the common people, and the children of Protestant parents were drawn into an observance of popish rites. The Great Controversy, Ellen G. White. The Black Pope, the office of Superior General of the Jesuits, has been said to be the most powerful man in the world. Currently, he is Adolfo Nicolas, who lived and taught theology in Asia, so a Jesuit goal at this time would be the subjection of Asia. At the time of 9/11, Adolfo Nicolas' predecessor, Peter Hans Kolvenbach, was Superior General of the Jesuits, as he was a specialist in the Middle East that they needed. Jesuit priest Malachi Martin wrote in his book, The Keys of This Blood, that he identifies the last decades of the 20th century as the end game of the New World Order. 9/11 was an extremely suspicious event. The many inconsistencies, such as molten iron seen spewing out the sides of the building, seen in controlled demolitions when using thermite, and the squibs, also a telltale sign of controlled demolition. There were also many private videos and conflicting statements by witnesses that made the official story unconvincing. The people in power were all subservient to the Vatican. General Michael Hayden, Jesuit educated at De Quincy, George Tenet, Jesuit educated at Georgetown, George H. Bush, who bows down to the Pope, and seen here giving George Tenet a medal for the biggest intelligent blackout in history. Donald Rumsfeld attended Jesuit Georgetown University. NORAD, North American Aerospace Defense Command, is directed by Roman Catholic Ralph Eberhard, and was criticized by Senator Mark Dayton, saying, "This country and its citizens were completely undefended for 109 minutes.
On the morning of September 11, 2001, 19 men armed with box cutters, directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world using a satellite phone and a laptop, directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world, overpowering the passengers and the military combat-trained pilots on 4 commercial aircraft before flying those planes wildly off course for over an hour without being molested by a single fighter interceptor. These 19 hijackers, devout religious fundamentalists who like to drink alcohol, snort cocaine, and live with pink-haired strippers, managed to knock down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York, while in Washington, a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon in the Budget Analyst Office, where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before, on September 10th, 2001. Luckily, the news anchors knew who did it within minutes.
Osama bin Laden.
The pundits knew within hours.
Osama bin Laden.
The administration knew within the day.
Terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
And the evidence literally fell into the FBI's lap.
That a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
But for some reason, a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists demanded an investigation into the greatest attack on American soil in history. That investigation was delayed, underfunded, set up to fail, a conflict of interest, and a cover-up from start to finish. It was based on testimony extracted through torture, the records of which were destroyed. It failed to mention the existence of WTC-7, Able Danger, P-TECH, Sibel Edmonds, OBL and the CIA, and the drills of hijacked aircraft being flown into buildings that were being simulated at the precise same time that those events were actually happening. It was lied to by the Pentagon, the CIA, the Bush administration, and as for Bush and Cheney, well, no one knows what they told it because they testified in secret, off the record, not under oath, and behind closed doors. It didn't bother to look at who funded the attacks because that question is ultimately of little practical significance. Still, the 9/11 Commission did brilliantly, answering all of the questions the public had, except most of the victims' family members' questions, and pinned blame on all the people responsible, although no one so much as lost their job, determining the attacks were
failure of imagination.
Because
nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
Except the Pentagon, FEMA, NORAD, and the NRO. The DIA destroyed 2.5 terabytes of data on Able Danger, but that's okay because it probably wasn't important. The SEC destroyed their records on the investigation into the insider trading before the attacks, but that's okay because destroying the records of the largest investigation in SEC history is just part of routine record keeping. NIST has classified the data that they used for their model of WTC7's collapse, but that's okay because knowing how they made their model of the collapse would jeopardize public safety. The FBI has argued that all material related to their investigation of 9/11 should be kept secret from the public, but that's okay because the FBI probably has nothing to hide. This man never existed, nor is anything he had to say worthy of your attention, and if you say otherwise, you are a paranoid conspiracy theorist and deserve to be shunned by all of humanity. Likewise him, and her. And her, and her, and him. Osama bin Laden lived in a cave fortress in the hills of Afghanistan, but somehow got away. Then he was hiding out in Tora Bora, but somehow got away. Then he lived in Abbottabad for years, taunting the most comprehensive intelligence dragnet employing the most sophisticated technology in the history of the world for a decade, releasing video after video with complete impunity and getting younger and younger as he did so, before finally being found in a daring SEAL team raid which wasn't recorded on video, in which he didn't resist or use his wife as a human shield, and in which these crack special forces operatives panicked and killed this unarmed man, supposedly the best source of intelligence about those dastardly terrorists on the entire planet. Then they dumped his body in the ocean before telling anyone about it. Then a couple dozen of that team's members died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. This is the story of 9/11, brought to you by the media which told you the hard truth.
Every CIA director since 9/11 has been Jesuit trained and have employed the subjugation of nations, building a case to wage war in the Middle East in an effort to neutralize Muslims and to control resources, furthering the New World Order.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you gotta come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
Speculation has been raised on the reasons for NATO's intervention in Libya. And as RT's Laura Emmett reports, the organisation may have been trying to prevent Gaddafi from burying the American buck.
According to some, it's about protecting civilians.
We must not tolerate this regime using military force against its own people.
Others say it's about oil.
The only reason they're interested with Libya is about the oil. You'd think we'd be in Iraq if the major export there was broccoli.
But some are convinced intervention in Libya is all about currency, specifically Gaddafi's plan to introduce the gold dinar, a single African currency made from gold, a true sharing of the wealth.
It's one of these things that you have to plan almost in secret, because as soon as you say you're going to change over from the dollar to something else, you're going to be targeted. There were two conferences on this, one in 96 and another one in the year 2000, called the World Mataba Conference, organized by Gaddafi. And everybody was interested. I think most countries in Africa were keen.
Gaddafi didn't give up. In the months leading up to the military intervention, he called on African and Muslim nations to join together to create this new currency that would rival the dollar and euro. They would sell oil and other resources around the world only for gold dinars. It's an idea that would shift the economic balance of the world. Countries' wealth would depend on how much gold they have, not how many dollars they trade. And Libya has 144 tons of gold. The UK has double that, but 10 times the population.
If Gaddafi had an intent to try to reprice his oil or whatever else the country was selling in the global markets and accept something else as a currency, or maybe launch a gold dinar currency, any move such as that would certainly not be welcomed by the power elite today who are responsible for controlling the world's central banks. So yes, that would certainly be something that would cause his immediate dismissal and the need for other reasons to be brought forth for removing him from power.
It's happened before. In 2000, Saddam Hussein announced Iraqi oil would be traded in euros, not dollars. Sanctions and an invasion followed. Some say because the Americans were desperate to prevent OPEC from transferring oil trading in all its member countries to the euro.
The UK's gold is kept here in a secure vault somewhere in the depths of the Bank of England. As in most developed countries, there's not enough to go around. But that's not the case in places like Libya and many of the Gulf states. A gold dinar would have given oil-rich African and Middle Eastern countries the power to turn around to their energy-hungry customers and say, sorry, the price has gone up and we want gold. Some say the US and its NATO allies literally couldn't afford to let that happen.
There's another number that is alarming to me. It is that 90% of the civilian casualties, 90% come from the Syrian army.
How did you get that result?
That was a report that was issued in the last 6 months.
Okay, as I said earlier, the war is not traditional war. It's not about capturing land and gaining land. It's about winning the hearts and minds of the Syrian. We cannot win the heart of minds of the Syrians while we are killing Syrians. We cannot sustain 4 years in that position as a government and me as president while the rest of the world, most of the world, the great powers and regional power are against me and my people against me. That's impossible. I mean, this logic has no leg to stand on. So this is not realistic, and this is against our interest as government is to kill the people. What do we get? What's the benefit of killing the people?
Well, I mean, the argument is that there are weapons of war that have been used that most people look down on with great. One is chlorine gas. They believe it has been used here. They said there is evidence of that, and they would like to have the right to inspect to see where it's coming from. Mm-hmm. As you know, barrel bombs have been used, and they come from helicopters. And the only people who have helicopters is the Syrian army. And so those two acts of war, which the society looks down on as...
Let me fully answer this.
Barbaric acts.
It's very important. This is part of the malicious propaganda against Syria. First of all, the chlorine gas is not military gas. You can buy it anywhere.
But it can be weaponized.
No, because it's not very effective. It's not used as military gas. That's very self-evident. Traditional armament is more important than chlorine. And if it was very effective, the terrorists would have used this on a larger scale. Because it's not effective, it's not used very
Then why not let somebody come in and inspect it, see whether it's been used or not? You'd be happy for that?
Of course. We always ask a delegation, impartial delegation, to come and investigate. But I mean, logically and realistically, it cannot be used as a military. This is part of the propaganda because, as you know, in the media, when it bleeds, it leads. And they always look for something that bleeds, which is the chlorine gas and the barrel bomb.
You do use barrel bombs. You're just saying...
There's no such a thing called barrel bombs. We have bombs. And any bombs is about killing.
You have often spoken about the danger of a wider war in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Let me talk about the parties involved and characterize how you see them. Let me begin with Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia is anarchic autocracy, medieval system that's based on the Wahhabi dark ideology. Actually, let's say it's a marriage between the Wahhabi and the political system for 200 years now. That's how we look at it.
And what is their connection to ISIS?
The same ideology, the same background.
So ISIS and Saudi Arabia are one and the same?
The same ideology, yes.
Same ideology?
Ideology, it's Wahhabi ideology. They base, their ideology is based on the books of the Wahhabi in Saudi Arabia.
So you believe that all Wahhabis have the same ideology as ISIS?
Exactly, definitely. And that's announced by ISIS, by Al-Qaeda, by Al-Nusra. It's not something we discover or we try to promote. It's very, I mean, their book, they use the same books to indoctrinate the people.
How about Turkey?
Turkey, let's say, is about Erdogan, his Muslim Brotherhood fanatics.
And
doesn't mean that he's a member, but he's a fanatic.
President Erdogan is
a Muslim Brotherhood fanatic. And he's somebody who's suffering from political megalomania, and you think that he's becoming the Sultan of the new era, of the 21st century.
You think he could stop the border if he wanted to?
Yeah, of course, definitely. He doesn't only ignore the terrorists from coming to Syria, he supports them logistically and militarily, directly, on a daily basis.
Tell us what the Russians want. They are a strong ally of you.
Yeah.
What do they want?
Definitely, they want to have balance in the world. It's not only about Syria. I'm a small country. It's not about having a huge interest in Syria. They could have it anywhere else. So it's about the future of the world. They want to be great power that have their own say in the future of this world.
And what do they want for Syria?
The stability. They want stability and political solution.
And what does Iran want?
The same. The same. Syria and Iran and Russia see eye to eye regarding this conflict.
And what is your obligation to both of them?
What do you mean obligation?
What do you owe them?
Yeah, I know, but they didn't ask for anything. Nothing at all. That's what I said. They don't do that for Syria. They do it for the region and for the world, because stability is very important for them.
Plan was first announced by George W. Bush when he was president just after the invasion of Iraq in 2003 at a G8 meeting, and it was called the Greater Middle East Project. And that project, they published a map of what they had in mind, was the control and the democratization, as they call it, of the entire Islamic world from Afghanistan, Pakistan, down through Iran, Syria, the Persian Gulf area, the oil-producing states there, and across North Africa all the way to Morocco. Events, the so-called Arab Spring, have been planned years back, and the instigators of those so-called spontaneous protests, these Twitter revolts in Cairo and Tunisia and so forth over the last months, have all been pre-organized assiduously. Some of the people, leaders of the protests, have been trained in Belgrade in Serbia by Otpor activists financed by the U.S. State Department. This thing has State Department and U.S. intelligence all over it. And why are they doing this? Well, two things in my view. One, there is vast wealth in the hands of the leading circles in the Arab world. Vast wealth. Sovereign wealth funds of countries like Kuwait and other countries, but also just the resources. And one of the agendas is to introduce, as was done in the Soviet Union after 1991, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the agenda of IMF privatization, free market economy, and so forth, so that Western banks and financial agencies and corporations could come in and take the plunder. The second agenda is militarily, in places such as Libya or South Sudan, now the so-called Republic of South Sudan, to militarize those oil sources that are directly strategic to China's future economic growth. So this is all about controlling Eurasia, something Zbigniew Brzezinski talked about back in 1997 in his famous book, The Grand Chess Game, and controlling especially Russia and China and any potential cohesion of the Eurasian countries economically and politically.
But as a result of the so-called Arab Spring, can we honestly say that Middle East and Northern African countries, which have gone through with the changes, have they really become more democratic?
Egyptian and Tunisian friends of mine say that it's just the opposite. The economy is in far worse shape. Libya had the highest living standard in all of Africa before the bombings of NATO. Today, the country is in ruins because of those bombings, not because of Gaddafi. The economy of Egypt is in dire straits. The military remains in control. The military high command of Egypt was sitting in the Pentagon when the revolts kicked off and waited for a signal from the Pentagon when to return and take control of those events.
So will the instigators of the conflicts, who seem to be, the United States and maybe some of the European powers, if we look at Libya, will they be able to restore normality in these countries, or is it not even in their interest?
I don't think they give a moment's thought to normality or normalization. I think what their concern is, especially the Pentagon, is military control. The next step will be in this so-called Transitional National Council in Libya is to have that puppet government give NATO permanent basing rights inside Libya, something they never had before under Gaddafi. South Sudan, a similar thing. They're defenseless unless they have NATO forces in there. The AFRICOM is coordinating this, the Pentagon's Africa Command, which was interestingly enough created just after China's 2006 Africa diplomacy, where 40 heads of African nations were invited to Beijing, and enormous deals were signed with the Chinese companies for oil exploration, to build hospitals, give soft loans, everything the IMF didn't do in Africa in the last 30 years. The Chinese began doing, and that had enormous results. For the only way, as they see it, they can survive and keep the dollar as their instrument, Wall Street I'm talking about, is the gods of money, as I call it in my book, is to find new areas of loot. So the Arab Spring is directed against grabbing and privatizing the vast wealth of the Arab oil world and the Arab world generally, just as the use of the IMF in the former Soviet Union was consciously designed by Wall Street and by Washington in order to plunder the vast resources of Russia and the former Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact countries.
So if the dollar does not retain its superior status, do you think there is any likelihood that the euro will retain it, or inherit it, rather?
Well, one reason that there's this difficulty with Greece and these so-called Eurozone weaker economies is that this is part of a kind of a covert financial warfare between the dollar and the euro as reserve currency. It started when the Chinese started complaining publicly about the flawed economic policy of Washington, running up deficits and endangering the value of Chinese treasury bonds. So now, just when that became public, suddenly there was a Greek crisis, and the Greek crisis was put in place in 2002 before Greece entered the Eurozone by none other than Goldman Sachs, the most powerful bank in America, arguably today, politically well connected in Washington. So it's very clear, if you follow the money trail, that the Greek crisis was programmed to be detonated at command by Wall Street and the U.S. Treasury, as well as the Federal Reserve, in order to defend the reserve currency role of the U.S. dollar. But I don't see the European economies endangered as the U.S. because one great difference, Europe still produces things. Europe still has real industry.
Would you believe that, from going back to the beginning of our interview, would you believe that there are some European countries which benefit from the situation unraveling, say, in Libya right now, like France?
Well, I was just going to say, Sarkozy had a meeting in March when the whole drama in Libya kicked off. He invited leaders of this so-called Transitional National Council to Paris and made them whispered sweet nothings in their ears about having control of the oil resources of eastern Libya, and poured money, weapons. The CIA and the French intelligence have been pouring arms into these insurgent groups inside Libya. This is an armed insurrection financed by NATO countries in Libya. It's no peaceful Twitter revolution of a bunch of kids who have a dream of American-style democracy or something. This is raw power grab by the French.
What do you predict, or in your opinion, what do you think will happen in Libya now? I mean, the NATO troops will have to pull out at some point, and then what?
Well, will they? I imagine an Iraq-like scenario or Afghanistan. What do you have in Afghanistan? You have 17 permanent U.S. military bases in Afghanistan, most of them air bases who are not bombing the Taliban. They're preparing for a coming war in perhaps 10 years with China, or maybe with Russia. They've got a military bastion in the heart of Central Asia. That's something that they never had during the Cold War. So I think Libya is destined for a similar treatment.
What role do you think Russia should play in the events which are unraveling right now?
I think Russia, given the history going back more than the Cold War era, Russia can play a very stabilizing role as a counterforce to this highly dangerous strategy of the Greater Middle East project of NATO and the U.S. in that region. Russia can play a very important role blocking some untoward events from the side of the UN Security Council in Syria. I don't think China would agree, as they did on the Libya case, to a UN action, sanction action in Syria. But in more ways than that, Russia can play a very constructive role, I think, in the region to try to counter this destabilization. I would hope they do.
The Americans say in some of their comments and wordplay that we are friends of the Iranian nation. They are lying, they are lying. You can see this through their actions. They threaten Iran, then they expect the Islamic Republic to reduce its defense capabilities. Is this not funny? Is this not ridiculous? At the same time, while threatening us, they say you must reduce your defense capabilities. No, the Iranian nation and authorities, various authorities from different sectors in the armed forces, with the help of God, will increase their defense strength every day.
My impression of your argument is that some Arab countries who are now engaged in the fight against ISIS earlier supported the rise of ISIS.
Well, in any way, sir, you're fully aware that not only regional countries, some regional countries, but also some countries from outside our region were supporting various terrorist groups. The United States herself has been a supporter of them, and these types of supports have come in various forms, some financially, some with equipping, and some made their country, the territory of their nations, as a passageway to the field of battle, and some encouraged them in their domestic media and international media. All of them, in one fashion or another, encouraged and supported these terrorists. Whereas terrorism is always bad, without exceptions. You cannot say now it's good and another time condemn it. It is always bad and evil.
Why would these governments support terrorism?
Unfortunately, in the world of politics, the understanding for some is such that when an objective becomes of paramount importance, for example, the toppling of a certain government becomes of utmost importance, then they allow themselves to use any means in order to reach their own objective. Whereas these means, these tools can at a later point be used against them.
You're suggesting that Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey supported the terrorist because they wanted to overthrow President Bashar al-Assad.
I did not name any countries, but be that as it may, it's your wish to interpret that any way you wish. You're free to do so. There were numerous countries that with the government, were opposed to the government in Syria and were under the impression that by supporting these terrorists they would succeed in toppling that government. But
academic and author Dr. Michel Chossudovsky warned that the so-called war on terrorism is a front to propagate America's global hegemony and create a new world order. He was speaking at the International Conference on the New World Order, Recipe for War or Peace. Dr. Chossudovsky said terrorism is made in the US. and that terrorists are not the product of the Muslim world. According to him, the US global war on terrorism was used to enact anti-terrorism laws that demonized Muslims in the Western world and created Islamophobia. Elaborating on his argument, Dr. Chossudovsky said that NATO was responsible for recruiting members of the Islamic State, while Israel is funding global jihad elements inside Syria.
Al-Qaeda and the Al-Qaeda affiliated organizations, including the Islamic State, are not independent organizations. They are sponsored, and they are sponsored by the United States and its allies. It is documented that prior to 2011, there was a process of recruitment of mujahideen to fight in Syria, and this was coordinated by NATO and the Turkish High Command. This report is confirmed by Israeli news sources, and unequivocally, we are dealing with the state sponsorship of terrorism, the recruitment of mercenaries, the training and the financing of terrorism. As much as possible, the United States has delegated its authority to other partners, despite the fact that ultimately this is an initiative of US intelligence, coordinated with the US State Department and the Pentagon.
Dr. Chossudovsky, who is also the founder of the Center for Research and Globalization, further emphasized that the global war on terrorism is a fabrication, a big lie, and a crime against humanity. Echoing Dr. Chossudovsky's arguments, Malaysia's prominent political scientist, Islamic reformist and activist Dr. Chandra Muzaffar said that the US has always manipulated religion to further its global hegemony on sovereign states. For example, he said the Arab Spring was brought about by Colonel Muammar Mohammad Gaddafi's resistance to US dominance. Earlier, Dr. Chossudovsky launched his new book titled The Globalization of War. The anti-war initiative, Perdana Global Peace Foundation, has a single goal of putting an end to war. Founded by Malaysia's former Prime Minister, Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, the foundation encourages dialogues between different nations, people and organizations to foster love and global peace. Its sister foundation, the Kuala Lumpur Foundation to Criminalize War, aims to undertake all necessary measures to criminalize war and energize peace. It also found former US President George Bush and former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, among others, guilty of war crimes. Speaking to reporters at the Perdana Global Peace Foundation's one-day international conference titled The New World Order, Recipe for War or Peace, Dr. Mahathir warned that Malaysia might lose its independence if the government falls prey to the ploys of the US to increase its global hegemony through economic means.
We will lose our freedom. We'll have to always consult them or submit to them or take their orders from them. Then we have lost. We fought for independence, Merdeka. Now we are going to lose our independence. These people are planning that. And if you don't do it, they threaten to cut off trade from you. They threaten to support people who will overthrow the government, give them money, instigate, give publicity, propaganda for them to overthrow any government that we have. Because they want a government that will say yes to them all the time.
The New World Order refers to the emergence of a totalitarian world government. Other prominent speakers at the conference also said that a secretive power elite led by the United States wants to replace sovereign nations.
Господин Сноуден, Mr. Snowden has indeed arrived in Moscow. It was completely unexpected. He arrived as a transit passenger and as such needed no visa or any other documents. He has a full right to transit. In this way he is free to purchase a ticket and fly to any destination he wishes.
Он не пересекает государственные границы, поэтому ему виза не нужна.
In doing so, he does not cross our state border and therefore needs no visa. Therefore, any accusations aimed at Russia are nothing more than utter nonsense. He is a transit passenger and as such is located in the transit area. Our special services have never interacted with Mr. Snowden before and they do not do it today.
Что касается возможной выдачи,
as for the possibility of extradition, we can only hand over foreign state nationals to those states that we have a relevant, valid international agreement on the extradition of criminals. We do not have any such treaties signed with the United States. And thank God, Snowden has not committed any crimes on the territory of the Russian Federation.
Есть и другой фигурант подобный.
There is another person in a similar situation, that's Mr. Assange, who is demanded for extradition and called a criminal, just like Mr. Snowden. He considers himself a human rights activist and fights for the freedom of information. Ask yourself a question, whether anyone has to extradite such people so they are thrown into a jail. In any case, personally, I would like to not deal with such issues because it's like shearing a pig. There's a lot of squealing and little fleece. I hope that this will in no way affect the business-like character of our relationship with the United States. I hope that our partners will understand that. Mr. Snowden is a free man, and the sooner he picks his final destination, the better it will be for both him and us.
Of Crimea have voted overwhelmingly in favour of joining Russia in Sunday's referendum. RT's Paula Shia has the latest now from the region. Paula, how are the results being received?
Well, there's certainly a very cheerful and festive atmosphere here in the Crimean city of Sevastopol. The latest results, almost 97% of people voting overwhelmingly in joining Russia. This was an historic referendum. The voter turnout was 83%. Now, that is 2 to 3 times the number of people who turned out to cast their ballot than the last election that was held back in 2012. Throughout the night, there have been celebrations in Simferopol, in Sevastopol, and in several other cities and regions across Crimea. Fireworks going off. Even now, in the early hours of this morning, people are walking around with the Russian flag draped over them. There are cars blaring their hooters, driving down the main streets with the Russian flag waving outside them. I was speaking to one woman who said that this is the best day of her life. And as another person put it, he said they've always been Russian in their soul, and today they're returning to Russia. There's also been praise from the international observers who come here from more than 20 countries. They say that the election ran smoothly, there were no major hiccups and no reports of incidents or any kind of violations.
Since the beginning of the crisis in Ukraine, the United States has worked to build a strong international coalition to support Ukraine, its sovereignty, its territorial integrity, its right to determine its own destiny, and to increase the pressure on Russia for actions that have undermined Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and ability to make its own decisions. The core of that coalition is the United States and our European allies. In recent days, I've continued to coordinate closely with our allies and our partners to ensure a unified response to the shoot-down of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 and Russia's continued arming of the separatists. And I've spoken several times with Prime Minister Rutte of the Netherlands and Prime Minister Abbott of Australia. Yesterday, I had a chance to speak with Prime Minister Cameron of the United Kingdom, President Hollande of France, Chancellor Merkel of Germany, and Prime Minister Renzi of Italy. We are united in our view that the situation in Ukraine ought to be resolved diplomatically, and that a sovereign, independent Ukraine is no threat to Russian interests. But we've also made it clear, as I have many times, that if Russia continues on its current path, the cost on Russia will continue to grow. And today is a reminder that the United States means what it says. And we will rally the international community in standing up for the rights and freedom of people around the world. Today, and building on the measures we announced 2 weeks ago, the United States is imposing new sanctions in key sectors of the Russian economy: energy, arms, and finance.
Leaders are to look into new data on July's Malaysian passenger plane crash over Ukraine, which killed almost 300 people. An alleged whistleblower approached the Russian newspaper saying the plane was shot down by a Ukrainian fighter jet. Murat Gazdiev brings us more.
According to this source, this witness, this alleged witness, he says that he worked at a Ukrainian airfield from which military jets flew sorties in the east of the country. He says that he witnessed 3 Ukrainian military jets taking off on the 17th of July, the day that MH17 went down. And he says that one of those jets was armed with anti-air missiles. But he says when it came back, it did not have those missiles. When the pilot got out, he was visibly shaken.
Фраза была от него слышна, когда из самолета вывели самолет не тот. И вечером вечерняя фраза была вопрос у одного летчика к нему, к этому же. Что там с самолетом? На что тот ответил, самолет оказался в ненужное время в ненужном месте.
But the Ukrainian government has claimed that none of its jets were in the air when MH17 went down, that none of its jets flew any sorties, though the Russian government released radar data recordings showing a presumable Su-25 fighter jet, a Ukrainian Su-25 fighter jet in the vicinity of MH17 when it went down. This source, though, his identity remains hidden, fearing revenge attacks against his family, which are still in Ukraine.
We spoke to the editor-in-chief of the newspaper that published the story.
The witness told us that the pilot, whose name is Captain Voloshin, was shocked, confused, and in a state of mind he defined the passenger jet as an operational target. But the blame...
There's too much secrecy regarding investigations, which is not very satisfactory. I cannot understand why the Malaysian government did not ask for the black box or for the wreckage that was found in Ukraine. It is quite unusual. Involvement of Malaysia is limited. And local media has not made a full coverage. They never send any team to take pictures there or to investigate. Local media, the mainstream media, is very much under the control of the government. Almost immediately after the plane was brought down, America accused Russia and then applied sanctions against Russia. We don't accept news like that.
So you don't accept accusations against Russia?
No, I don't think even the government accepts. We are very neutral about this because there is no real evidence. One of the suspects of shooting down the aircraft could be Ukraine because, well, they were fighting and we don't know who actually fired the missile, if it was the missile.
Do you think this investigation is carried out objectively?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
But back to Gideon Rockman. He starts out with the question that so many of us have been asking, sometimes genuinely, sometimes rhetorically, particularly those of us who voted for President Obama and just don't understand why he is actually working harder at pushing the TPP than he ever did for the public option for Obamacare, which arguably would have turned Obamacare into, an insanely successfully dynamic program. Which is not to say Obamacare has not had its successes, but why is this so important to him? There are two issues at play here, and they both have to do with China. Gideon Rockman, the headline is Obama's Pacific trade deal would not tame China. And he opens with this question, and only it's not rhetorical. He says, why is Barack Obama so desperate? And I think that that's a reasonably appropriate word. Why is Barack Obama so desperate to secure a Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal? And then he says, well, the pitch, the long-winded answer, the pitch that everybody's giving is, 12 countries are going to get together and trade, and it'll be just wonderful for the world and everybody else. But he says the short, real answer is China. China is not part of TPP. We have a separate agreement with China. It's called a bilateral agreement, 2 countries. And basically what we have given China is what is referred to as permanent normal trade relations, which means that, they can make and sell stuff and ship it into the United States with no tariffs and no restrictions, which they do. It's why you walk into any store in America and probably 95% of what you see is made in China. Meanwhile, China, which has developed a very, very sophisticated form of state-run capitalism, or state and corporate capital. I'm not. There's not a well-accepted term for this yet, and there should be, because this is essentially what England was doing from the 1600s forward, up until the last 100 years. With the East India Company and everything. It's kind of a state-sponsored corporate thing. But there's these 2 issues. One is economic, and the other is military. And China is growing so fast in both these areas. I mean, they're literally taking reefs off the coast of China, pouring sand and dirt on them, turning them into military bases, which has the Japanese totally freaked out. And they're starting to claim, Japanese land and extend their territorial waters and all this kind of stuff. So there's that military thing. And then there's also the economic thing. And in fact, Shinzo Abe, the president of Japan, was originally opposed to involving his country in the TPP negotiations. But he finally said, yeah, okay, we'll do this. And why? Well, according to Gideon Rockman, strategic interests. We've got to stop China, says Abe, says the president of Japan.
Jesuit education would consist in the creation of multiplying agents, Jesuit General Pedro Urupe, S.J. People underestimate the seductive enticements of the Jesuit network, who facilitate positions of power for individuals who will further the cause of the New World Order. Presidential candidates such as Donald Trump is one such individual who received a Jesuit education at Fordham Jesuit University. Hillary Clinton is controlled by the same shadow government via a different route, the military-industrial complex, Bilderberg Group, and the Council of Foreign Relations. Jeb Bush is subservient to the papacy. Ben Carson, a Seventh-day Adventist, is an enigma in the minds of many, especially the Seventh-day Adventists, who are puzzled to how a President of the United States can keep the 10 Commandments. Their beliefs, thou shalt keep the Sabbath day holy, and thou shalt not kill, banning foreign wars of conquest. These 2 commandments make it nearly impossible to be a US president, especially with a shadow government snapping at your heels. Ex-Jesuit priest Dr. Alberto Rivera explained that the secret sign that Protestantism has been wiped out was when a president of the US took his oath facing an obelisk. In 1981, the swearing-in of Ronald Reagan as president was moved to the west front of the Capitol, and he was sworn in as president facing an obelisk. Protestantism had effectually been wiped out, and the Jesuits had control of America. Candidates running for US presidency know very well who must be appeased. The Roman Catholic Church and the Jesuit-influenced globalists often groom and elect presidents without the knowledge of the public, as sometimes votes are often manipulated from behind the scenes as well. The mighty and widely ramified Order of St. Ignatius was powerful enough to procure by its interests far greater advantages to individuals than could any other corporation, fraternity, or even secular power. Jesuit General Jean-Baptiste Janssens. Murdoch, seen here at the Jesuit University of Georgetown, admitted his support of globalist plans of invading Iraq.
But is there any agenda that you want to shape?
No, not at all. I mean, I think that we don't have the power to change it. We obviously, if you're in media and you're concerned with what's going on in the world, you'd like to make a difference by putting forward your opinions. But you're not going to change the world completely by that. I think we can't change elections. I think good, strong news organizations can, by disclosing things, can help shape the agenda, but only in a limited way.
For example, take the war. I'm not just talking about the United States, but in terms of you having a global media enterprise, I mean, have you shaped that agenda at all in terms of perceptions of the war, in terms of how the war is viewed?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we've tried.
Tried in what way?
Well, we basically supported our papers and our television. I would say supported the Bush policy in the Middle East.
Murdoch's power over May's general election is undimmed. Right now, he is using his Sun, Times and Sunday Times newspapers to destroy Ed Miliband as Labour continues to lead in polling. Remember, it is Murdoch's papers that chair-led the war in Iraq, that cheerleads all UK foreign policy when it is in lockstep with Washington. It chair-led the bailouts after the financial crash of 2008. But it's not just his newspapers that exert a disproportionate influence on life in Britain. Books and films in Britain are de facto vetted by Murdoch because News Corp is involved in HarperCollins and 20th Century Fox. And his Sky News operation will never want to upset the interests of Murdoch as long as he is in control of the network.
Globalists always have their finger on the pulse and emotions of people all over the world, especially within the United States, thanks to psychologists, social engineers working behind the scenes. Barack Obama was elected when US citizens were wearied by war and the financial crisis of 2008. People were desperate for change, and that was exactly the angle globalists sold their CIA Jesuit-trained president to America. Barack Obama was groomed for the presidency by the Jesuits, and his mentor Jesuit priest Gregory Galuzzo is still influencing Obama.
And does he keep in contact with the organisation now?
You know, once he became a U.S. Senator, he's very much in demand. So it's only on occasion we get to interact with him.
Well, an occasion is fine, isn't it?
Obama has appointed many Jesuit-educated individuals to positions of power. According to Obama's paternal grandmother, he was born in Mombasa, Kenya. Later, he was enrolled in an Indonesian public school, as he was a citizen of Indonesia, where he learnt to recite the Muezzin call to prayer in a perfect Arabic accent. Obama then went to an Indonesian Franciscan Roman Catholic school. Many years after Obama moved to Hawaii, he met Frank Marshall Davis, who was a member of the Communist Party USA. Frank Davis trained Obama in Stalinist Marxism, and Obama then went to Harvard, as his fees were paid for by the father of a member of the Black Panthers, who were dedicated to a global international communist revolution. After Obama went to Chicago as a community activist, he became good friends with Bill Ayers, who was the co-founder of the Weather Underground, a communist revolutionary group. Bill Ayers was on the terrorist watch list. Finally, Obama arrived at the Jesuit-run Gamaliel Foundation, where he's hand-picked for his many talents and his ethnic and religious background.
When you go to other countries, the political divisions are so much more stark and wider. Here in America, the difference between Democrats and Republicans, we're fighting inside the 40-yard line. Maybe
you fooled most people on that in the last few months, I'd say.
No, I would distinguish between the rhetoric and the tactics versus the ideological differences. I mean, in most countries, you've got people call me a socialist sometimes, but no, you got to meet real socialists. You'll have a sense of what a socialist is. You know.
Karl Marx, as discussed earlier, only refined socialism-communism, which the Jesuits had developed in Paraguay from 1600 to 1750. This required implementing the teachings of both Plato, who wrote Plato's Republic, and Thomas More, who wrote Utopia, and the Jesuits tested their communist ideology on the South American Indians. As we have said before, the Vatican is more aligned with fascism due to the structure of nationalist militarism and the proposed amalgamation of church and state. But a different style of communism could be sufficient for the papal agenda of world domination. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who had a Jesuit education, stated that he is not entirely against communism, but only the Soviet model, perhaps because this model leaves no room for religion. He discussed the circumstances in which it could be possible for the Soviet Union to rejoin the Western Marxist tradition. Note that he didn't say they would become constitutionalists and celebrate property rights and freedom. The point is they would join with the other types of Marxists in the West, who now have positions of power, but they don't tell anyone they're Marxists. So you may now understand that Obama had exactly the right credentials to be elected president for the era of change in the meshing of a capitalist, Marxist, fascist New World Order. In other words, state capitalism, with an authoritarian, yet thuggish, twist. Obama's use of cunning and indirect strategy uses a more modern form of Jesuitical tactics, by conducting many assassinations by drones instead of the direct confrontational military action like the Bush-Cheney administration. Obama uses the method of regime change by coup d'etat, destroying the state from within, often training and funding rebels. Obama has signed unconstitutional laws into effect, like the NDAA crafted by Jesuit-trained Professor Viet Din, that effectively makes it possible to detain someone without charge or trial.
Your elected officials, both the Senate and the House of Representatives, have just overwhelmingly passed the National Defense Authorization Act. Squeezed into this military funding bill are two provisions that give the military not just lots and lots of money, but lots and lots of power as well, through two very controversial provisions. One expands the use of military force in Afghanistan to include indefinite detention of anyone suspected of being a member of Al-Qaeda or, quote, associated forces. So, essentially, anyone. But here's the big one, folks. It gives the military the power to indefinitely detain American citizens, even those captured here in the United States.
The Vatican, when she asserted power over the European nations from 538 AD to 1798 AD, exerted the same tactics of indefinite detention. The US government has no pangs of conscience using rectal hydration and waterboarding as a torture, extracting confessions. The very same tortures were used during the Spanish Inquisition in the 1500s by the Roman Catholic Church. So naturally, the Roman Catholic-controlled CIA brings the very same method back into play. CIA secret prisons have been exposed around the world, inflicting the heinous inquisitional forms of torture. Here is a map of countries that are complicit in the illegal detainment and torture of prisoners. Simon Perez recently stated that Pope Francis is more of a powerful peace advocate than the United Nations. So the relationship exists between the Zionist Jews and the Roman Catholic Church on many levels, as the common thread of Islam makes the Vatican and Zionist Israel unlikely bed partners. Israel procures favours of national security from Jesuit proxies and US government, not to mention nefarious business deals, as Jewish politicians do the bidding of New World Order advocates. Let us not forget that the Rothschilds are the guardians of the Vatican finance and treasury.
Mr. Rothschild, how you doing, sir? Can you tell us what went on at the Bilderberg meeting this year?
Sorry?
Could you tell us what went on at the Bilderberg meeting this year?
I didn't go to that, actually, no.
The Bilderberg? You weren't there?
No.
Not this year. What went on last year?
No, I wasn't there last year. I think that was my cousin.
The cousin was there?
Yeah, I think so. Okay. Good night.
Do you have a couple minutes for us, Mr. Rothschild? We have a few additional questions. I was definitely questioning inside of because I was saying that the Federal Reserve was one of these organizations. It's one of these organizations that a lot of people say was the source of God that shall across the world because it's a private thing that was started by your family.
No, it's completely untrue. I was asked that earlier. It really isn't true. No.
Jekyll Island, 1913, sir. I mean, but sir, just one thing, we could go on about how, you know, your family committed all these acts against society, but we just want to let you know the New World Order has no legitimacy. And that we as a people are not afraid, and we are waking up to the robber barons and the big banksters who are looting this economy with the Federal Reserve.
Well,
the document Protocols of Zion is singled out as the reason why Zionist Jews are responsible for the evils existing within the world. However, since this document just appeared out of thin air, many suspect it was meticulously construed to keep the Jesuits out of the limelight. Dr. Lehman uses his method of an anonymous document is best discovered by the document itself, by the cause it favours, convincingly demonstrating that this sinister document must have been forged by the Catholics, specifically by the Special Forces Order within Catholicism, the Jesuits. Zionism actually has little to do with Jewry. Here we see Orthodox Jews protesting against it. It would be more realistic to acknowledge Zionists as proxies of the Jesuits and involved in a symbiotic relationship.
For the speedy and peaceful dismantlement of the state of Israel, then we can once again coexist as we have for hundreds of years. We have older rabbis who will testify lived in the old state of Jerusalem, in the old city of Jerusalem, in the old city. They lived door by door. This rabbi lived in the old city of Jerusalem before 1948. He'll tell you how he lived, coexisted with all the Arab neighbors, how they babysat each other's children when they went to Yom Kippur, when the women went to Yom Kippur on the fast day. The Muslim neighbors babysat the children, the most precious objects they gave to them to protect. How could that be if they're our enemies, mortal enemies? Because they're not. It's not a religious conflict. That's a Zionist ploy of accusing everybody of being anti-Semitic. You want peace? You want to have a conference here of peace? Step back and look and read the facts. Not the facts that's been misconstrued by the Zionist propaganda. The facts that are realities. The facts on the ground, how we've been living for hundreds of years in Yemen, in Morocco, in Tunisia, in Palestine, in Egypt. What Arab land have not Jewish people been living together with Muslims without any human rights groups? Tell me what land the Jews did not live in harmony with the Muslims. In Iran, we have over 25,000 Jews there, thank God. Why? Because this is not a religious conflict. It's purely because of a political movement, a relatively new movement, which is antithetical, contradictory to the Jewish religion of thousands of years. Judaism is spirituality, a religion of compassion to emulate God. Zionism must be created 100 years ago by atheists, people who have abhorred religion, who wanted to transform Judaism from religion to nationality, to a purely materialistic base, godless in its essence. That is not Judaism, and they have no right to use the name of Israel. They've usurped our name, they've stolen our symbols, and they've stolen our identity. And they are causing death and destruction year in and year out. For over 50 years, death and bloodshed has not stopped because of a pure ideological belief called Zionism. They sacrifice on their idol bodies, human beings, hearts, souls. They rent, they've destructed houses, they've destructed people's lives. What can we do about this? Let's step back and think. There is a solution with God's help. If we would put away the politics, then we could know that we've been living and coexisting together. We most profusely apologize to the Muslims, to the Arabs, for what has been done to them. And then we can return, they make restitution for what has been done to them. And then we will be able to live in harmony. Not an Israeli state, but one Palestinian state. One state that we have been living for hundreds of years. There will be peace. And you will see that this 50 years has been a nightmare, a mirage, and nothing to do. Pure fear-mongering, that's what Zionism does. It's panic, going into a theater and yelling, fire, fire, that's what Zionists do. We've been living with the Muslims. We've been living, yes, Ahmadinejad keeps on stating that he does not want to harm the Jews, but the Zionists keep on antagonizing them. Of course you don't, because you have an agenda. agenda. You want to further Zionism. You want enemies. You want enemies in order to be able to say you're protecting the Jews. We don't want enemies. We want to live in peace. We have been always living in peace with the Muslims, and we will, with God's help, continue to live with them in peace. We implore the participants in this conference, read, step back, study the history.
While Jews do hold many positions in the finance sectors like the Federal Reserve and banking, the majority of positions in media, government, military and business are held by Roman Catholics, or those who have connections with the Vatican. Here we see DHS executive Jer Johnson at a Jesuit university. Janet Napolitano was also educated at a Jesuit university, and Michael Chertoff, the US Secretary of Homeland Security, is a Jew who, like most Zionist Jews, is subservient to the original Men in Black, the Jesuits. Michael Chertoff was the co-author of the Patriot Act. Michael Chertoff's wife, Meryl, is a professor of law at Georgetown Jesuit University.
Hi, I'm Janet Napolitano, Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Homeland Security begins with hometown security. Report suspicious activity to your local police or sheriff. If you need help, ask a Walmart manager for assistance.
Congress shall now vote for approval of H.R. 8791, the Homeland Terrorism Preparedness Bill. Said bill requests emergency response funding up to and including, this section is classified, dollars to prepare for a national level terrorist attack and or attack from classified. Funding for first responder personnel and vehicles would be doubled if said attack leads to more than 80% of national population being affected by classified. This funding shall commence in conjunction with the first attack on classified, or the first large-scale outbreak of classified, dependent upon which comes first. Civilian and military units shall be trained in containment and combat of classified, including irradiated classified, with possibility of classified airborne, classified flesh-eating, classified, and or all of the above in such event as classified spewing, classified escape, are released or otherwise become uncontrollable. Air Force units may also be directed to combat said classified due to their enormous size and otherworldly strengths. Should event occur in urban areas, Jesus, that's classified, far surpassing our darkest nightmares. Should casualties exceed classified, body disposal actions shall be halted and associated resources shall be reallocated to classified underground, classified protected birthing centers. A new Bill of Rights shall be drafted and approved by classified. Having now reviewed the bill, I ask you to please cast your votes.
The DHS, like most powerful US agencies, operates as a government within a government, bypassing unconstitutional laws when circumstances permit, such as in a state of emergency that may have been induced by a false flag operation. Here we see some of the hardware of Homeland Security who obviously see American citizens as a threat. Whistleblower Edward Snowden, an employee of the National Security Agency, released sensitive information unveiling total state and international surveillance of ordinary citizens throughout the world by US intelligence agencies such as the CIA, NSA and their allies such as the United Kingdom's MI6, Canada's CSIS, Australian ASIO and New Zealand NZSIS. These Western intelligence agencies are more or less extensions of the Roman Catholic secret society run CIA, who all work together on a very intimate level.
Activists in Canada are ringing a democracy alarm. The government there has passed an anti-terror bill into law. The law is called C-51, but I'd call it C-1984, and here's why. The law is extremely vague. For instance, advocating terrorism, even when there's no intent to commit a crime or violent act, is an offense. But what exactly does that mean? No idea. Plus, it potentially bans all activism. You're not allowed to question or interfere in the government's affairs at all. Police, they can detain anyone they suspect of being a terrorist, and there's no need to prove a person was going to commit a crime. Intelligence services, well, they can be allowed by courts to breach people's privacy and freedom of expression. Federal departments under the law, they're allowed to share personal information.
Veteran investigative reporter Seymour Hersh has broken some massive stories in his day, but uncovering secret societies within the highest echelons of America's military would probably be the biggest of his career. Seymour Hersh pointed out that General Stanley McChrystal, Vice Admiral William McRaven, and others in the Joint Special Operations Command were members of the Knights of Malta and Opus Dei, two little-known Catholic orders. The Knights of Malta and Opus Dei were instrumental in the war against Islam under the guise of the War on Terror, thanks to 9/11 as the match that set the world ablaze. The Knights of Malta were a Catholic order founded in 1085 as a group of monks who cared for the wounded. It evolved into a military order that safeguarded Christian pilgrims from Muslims during the 9 Crusades, when Europe's Christian states laid siege to Muslims for control of Jerusalem. Opus Dei, popularly depicted in the Hollywood film The Da Vinci Code, was founded in 1928 and officially accepted as part of the Catholic Church in 1947. The group's website claimed their principal calling was to bring about a Christian renewal around the world. It makes good sense that the Vatican has merged with the United States and vice versa for geopolitical stratagem. What other superpower would put the Roman Catholic Church on a pedestal once the New World Order has been established? China, an atheistic communist state? Or Russia, where the Russian Orthodox Church is the official state religion and an historical arch-enemy of the Vatican? The United States has the resources, technology, and the military might with a population of 319 million. The Roman Catholic Church, which has a local branch or church in just about every suburb in almost every country on the planet, which can easily be used for covert activities, influencing the masses and sparking revolutions. The Roman Catholic Church has 1.2 billion members. The combined military and economical might of the United States and Roman Catholic populace make these two forces unstoppable. So much, in fact, that the world has been brought into subjugation, including the 1.6 billion Muslims. The Muslims don't have either the technology or the military might, so it's not hard to guess who will come out on top. Russia and China must also be willing to accept the United States Vatican version of the New World Order. As we have seen in the merger of the Vatican and the United States, instigated by Pope John Paul II, and President Reagan bringing down the Berlin Wall, hastening the collapse of the Soviet Union, we can see the same tactics being employed against the Chinese Communist government.
2014年10月12日，2012榮耀盼望信息嘅感言部分，又話牧師分析當前嘅香港形勢，其實就同一啲人所歸納出嚟，美國影子政府製造人民革命、策反各國政府嘅12個步驟相近。
第一，派美國中情局、英國軍情六處等情報人員，以留學生、遊客、義工、商人、記者嘅身份進入目標國家。
第二，以人道目標為理由，開設民主、人權為主旨嘅非政府機構，開展工作之餘，亦都可以招攬一啲崇尚自由同埋理想嘅人。第三，開始喺當地招攬一啲叛徒，尤其係學者、政客、記者、軍人等，可以係賄賂嘅方式，或者係揾出佢哋嘅罪證以控制佢哋。第四，如果目標國家有工會勢力，就會以金錢收買佢哋。第五，為革命創作或者選擇一種象徵顏色或者鮮明嘅口號，例如1968年嘅布拉格之春、1989年東歐嘅天鵝絨革命、2003年格魯吉亞嘅玫瑰革命、2005年黎巴嫩嘅雪杉革命、烏克蘭嘅橙色革命、伊朗嘅綠色革命、
茉莉花革命、
阿拉伯之春，甚至香港嘅雨傘革命。第六，以唔同名義開始示威，從而展開革命運動。示威嘅名義可以係人權、民主、政府腐敗、選舉舞弊等，唔需要揾出證據，只需要揾到藉口就可以。第七，以英語寫上抗議標語，好讓美國人能夠睇見。 咁樣就能夠使到美國政客同埋平民開始發出呼聲。第8，讓之前所收買嘅政客、知識分子、工會領袖等加入示威，並且號召所有對政府唔滿意嘅人加入。第9，美國同埋歐洲嘅主流傳媒配合，不斷強調呢一場革命係因為各種唔公平所導致，從而獲得大多數人嘅支持。第10，當全世界都注視，就製造偽旗行動，拍攝人民被打壓嘅影像，以動搖目標政府，令政府失去人民嘅支持。第11，派出一啲引發暴亂嘅演員，以武力挑釁警方，迫使警方使用武力鎮壓，咁樣就可以使呢個政府失去其他國家嘅支持，被國際社會認為係非法政權。第12，運用政客到美國、歐盟、聯合國等地方陳情，使到目標政府受到國際經濟制裁，設立禁飛區，甚至協助空襲及供應武器俾叛軍。如果上述12個步驟都未能夠成功推翻目標政府，咁樣就讓美國尋找一個藉口作軍事介入，以武力推翻目標國家。事實上，呢12點亦都非常有效同埋成功。2007年，一位曾任北大西洋公約組織 NATO 嘅歐洲盟軍司令部美國退休4星將軍 Wesley Ken Clark 喺一個講座中提及，喺2001年911事件發生後冇幾耐，國防部曾經發出一個指令，就係喺5年內攻擊同埋推翻7個國家，包括伊拉克、黎巴嫩、利比亞、索馬利、蘇丹同埋伊朗。雖然呢個國防計劃並未有喺5年內完成，但係10多年之後，根據呢12個步驟，美國藉住阿拉伯之春同埋反恐戰爭，呢7個國家有啲已經被推翻，有啲陷入內戰，有啲亦都已經係崩潰嘅邊緣。因此，世界局勢、國家嘅被推翻，並唔係人民作出偶然或者自發嘅行動而造成，相反係經過精心策劃同埋計算。事實上，如果要推翻一個國家，以內部革命導致崩潰嘅方式，遠比出兵攻打便宜得多。亦都因此，美國不斷運用呢12個步驟去策反唔同嘅敵對國家。
However, the Chinese government are aware of the power and inner workings of the Vatican. Jesuit missionaries roamed China until the expulsion of all foreign missionaries in 1949. The Chinese government reserves the right to select and approve all Roman Catholic bishops in mainland China, which goes in direct opposition to the Vatican's wishes, and for very good reason. The Vatican is political and has influence over its subjects, instigating and facilitating revolutions. Not since a dispute in 1951 have China and the Vatican had diplomatic relations. The selection of the Roman Catholic cardinals in Hong Kong at this time is under the direction of the Vatican. Pope Benedict XVI appointed Hong Kong Bishop Joseph Zen Zikuan as cardinal on February 22, 2006, but the Chinese government warned that church leaders should not interfere in the country's politics. Anthony Liu, or Liu Bainan, is the honorary chairman of the state-run Chinese Catholic Patriotic Association, and stated that he hoped the appointment would not disrupt social stability in Hong Kong, and that Beijing's position on refraining from establishing diplomatic ties with the Vatican had not changed because of the appointment of Cardinal Zen, who is known for his outspoken appeals for maintaining diplomatic freedoms in Hong Kong and human rights on the mainland. However, lately, human rights violations perpetrated by the United States government exceed those of China. The communist government in China is well aware that the Roman Catholic Church and the United States government work together on many levels, as the CIA uses humanitarian organizations and democracy as weapons to fuel revolution. Russia has its own problems with the United States-Vatican merger, as world leaders distance themselves from Putin and slap sanctions against Russia for reasons that we'll recover later. Jesuit Pope Francis bowed down to dictator Mugabe, but on the 10th of June 2015 sent a very strong psychological message to Putin, further alienating the Russian leader. Here we see Pope Francis pathetically tapping his fingers on the desk across from Putin, psychologically coercing him to toe the line in the New World Order. Jesus had stated, "My kingdom is not of this world," John 18:36. So Christians should not have political ambitions. Yet the Vatican is a religio-political state trying to set up a temporal kingdom here on earth opposed to the true Church of Christ. The Vatican has led the Western world to believe that Sunday is the same holy day revered in the Bible. The Sabbath, Saturday, is the correct day, and there is not one verse in the Bible that backs Sunday keeping. Sunday is a creation of the offshoot of the Christianity that became the Roman Catholic Church. After all ideologies, nations and religions that challenge the Pope's power are neutralized, the Vatican will work through the United States to enforce a worldwide Sunday law. It's the beginning of a new world order religion. Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists, Jews, New Age, Baha'is, atheists, and Sunday-keeping Protestants will all keep Sunday, which will be enforced by the state by fine, imprisonment, and even death. This act acknowledges the Pope to be the supreme ruler of earth. Before this happens, the world will be warned with the three angels' message. And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation, and kindred, and tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, Fear God, and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven, and earth, and the sea, and the fountains of waters. And there followed another angel, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast in his image, and receive his mark in his forehead, or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation, and he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels, and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up for ever and ever, and they have no rest day or night who worship the beast in his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. The book of Revelation uses symbols to explain prophecy. The symbolic use of Babylon depicts the Vatican in Rome, which has disseminated her pagan doctrines with a Christian veneer. Apostle Peter even described Rome as the new Babylon. 1 Peter chapter 5 verse 13, The church that is at Babylon, elected together with you, saluteth you, and so doth Marcus my son. Ancient Babylon was a polytheistic religion including the worship of a sun god, which practiced on Sunday. The pure gospel was perverted, and the Roman Catholic Church was the result. Apostle Paul warned of this apostasy, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verses 7 to 9. For the mystery of iniquity doth already work, only he who now letteth will let, until he be taken out of the way. Apostle Paul explained that error was creeping into the church, and that when the Western Roman Empire came to its end, the papacy would take its place, and the Pope would arise. Roman Catholicism is simply a mixture of Christianity and paganism. The same polytheistic religion of Babylon exists today within the walls of every Catholic church. The veneration of saints, which simply replaced the many Babylonian gods. Babylonian Semiramis, who became Mary, and the worship of a sun god, are all inventions of ancient Babylon. Even the statue of Peter is actually the pagan god Jupiter, that was removed from the Pantheon in Rome and placed in St. Peter's Basilica. The Babylonian god Utu, or Shamash, became Sol Invictus in the Roman Empire, worshipped as the sun god on Sunday, Dies Solis, the day of sun. Revelation chapter 17, verse 5, And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Mystery Babylon can be understood in this dictionary definition. Mysteries, the secret rites of Greek and Roman pagan religion, or of any ancient or tribal religion, to which only initiates are admitted. The practices, skills, or law peculiar to a particular trade or activity, and regarded as baffling to those without specialized knowledge. Revelation chapter 17, verses 5, explains that this mystery religion appears in the guise of Christianity, but really is Babylonian paganism, understood by high-ranking cardinals and Jesuits. Mother of harlots means that the Roman Catholic Church has harlot daughters, and these unfaithful offspring have been seduced by Babylonian doctrine. Sunday-keeping Protestants came out of the Mother Roman Catholic Church during the Reformation and clung to Sunday worship. Interesting enough is that the Vatican minted coins depicting herself, just as the Bible predicts. Revelation chapter 17 verse 4, And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet colour, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. The cup that the woman is holding has a sun in it, depicting her fornication with the Babylonian religious sun worship or Sunday keeping instead of the Christian Sabbath. Purple and scarlet, also referring to Revelation chapter 17 verse 4, can be seen in the colours of priestly garments. Revelation chapter 14 verse 8 tells all people in this Babylonian system of deception to come out of her. Revelation chapter 14 verse 9. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast in his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand. Firstly, a beast in prophetic language is a kingdom explained in Daniel chapter 7 verse 23. Since we have established the papacy as this beast, what is her mark? Sunday is our mark or authority. The church is above the Bible, and this transference of Sabbath observance is proof of that fact. The Catholic Record of London, Ontario, September the 1st, 1923. The Sunday is purely a creation of the Catholic Church. American Catholic Quarterly Review, January 1883. Sunday is the law of the Catholic Church alone. American Sentinel Catholic, June 1893. The Fourth Commandment, Exodus chapter 20, verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. Even after the death and resurrection of Christ, the apostles kept the Sabbath, Saturday, and taught and founded all churches with the inclusion of the Fourth Commandment. The early churches, which included Gentiles in the region of Galatia, Corinth, Thessalonica and Rome, all kept Saturday as the Sabbath. Roman Emperor Constantine claimed that he had seen a vision with a cross in the sky with the writing In hoc signo vinces, translating to In this sign you will conquer. Constantine made a nominal conversion to Christianity, and under the influence of his apostate flatterer, the Bishop of Caesarea, named Eusebius, Constantine made a stately decree enforcing the change of the Sabbath day from Saturday to Sunday, amalgamating paganism and Christianity. Both pagans and Christians seemed to be united in a shrewd political move, but at the cost of the Fourth Commandment, remember to keep the Sabbath day holy. Under the enforcement of the state, many Christians compromised. This act was the beginning of mainstream Christianity keeping Sunday that has passed on through many generations. The Jesuit insignia, IHS, is said to be the Latinized version of Jesus in Greek. But Catholicism as a mystery religion has exoteric and esoteric meanings, like the inverted cross, Jupiter as Peter, and IHS as a Jesuit insignia, which are all well known by the inner circle of initiates. The IHS insignia includes a cross and 3 nails representing a V, which translates to In hoc signo vinces, and this sign you will conquer, with a sunburst. Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, had ambitious plans of conquering the world, using his illustrious order to bring absolute power back to Rome. The coat of arms for Jesuit Pope Francis has the Jesuit insignia on it as well, and is prophesied that the Vatican will conquer in this sign of the cross and the sun, but only for a very short space of time until God's wrath comes upon them. The blazing sun in the IHS represents pagan Sunday worship, which is demonstrated in the monstrance. Revelation chapter 14 verse 9 tells us of a beast which is the Vatican and image, simply meaning a copy or replica. If any man worship the beast in his image and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the image of the beast simply means a replica of Rome. The United States, with all its Roman architecture, will enforce Rome's spurious Sabbath of Sunday. Apostate American Protestantism will be foremost in leading the charge of this breach of the US Constitution. The First Amendment guarantees freedoms concerning religion, expression, assembly, and the right to petition. It forbids Congress from both promoting one religion over others and also restricting an individual's religious practices. Revelation chapter 14 verse 9. If any man worship the beast in his image and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand. Here the forehead symbolizes the seat of morals and choice by honoring Sunday as the Sabbath, and the hand signifies that by actions they will observe Sunday, not engaging in any work keeping the day holy. In Europe, Sunday is being marketed by the Jesuits using the European Sunday Alliance as a front. being a family day of rest. So individuals who receive the mark in the hand may be motivated by penalties that the state enforces or on the premise that Sunday be a family day of rest. Revelation chapter 13 verse 16. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. Revelation chapter 13 verse 17. And that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. With the rapid development of technology, the implementation of the mark of the beast will be effortless, thwarting any buying or selling by those who resist the mark. Many think the RFID chip is the mark of the beast, but that does not fit the mark of the beast prophecy, though it is possible that it could be used to restrict the buy or sell. But there are other technologies that are more practical than the RFID chip.
Karin Linder stocks up on supplies at the supermarket, but Karin, like most people here in Sweden, won't be paying with cash when she gets to the checkout.
I personally never use cash. As you see here, I'm shopping. I use my scanner. When I check out, I'll use my credit card, and my banking I do on my iPhone. So that's it. I don't need any cash.
Revelation chapter 13 verse 18. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. The Pope's Latin title, Vicarius Filii Dei, has been strenuously denied in recent years by the Vatican, perhaps because it adds up to 666. However, the documentation goes all the way back to the donation by Constantine in the medieval times, the first pope being his successor. The Vatican has already admitted Vicarius Filii Dei to be the Pope's title in earlier Catholic publications, so they won't be weaseling their way out of this one anytime soon. The letters inscribed in the Pope's mitre are these: Vicarius Filii Dei, which is the Latin for Vicar of the Son of God, our Sunday visitor, April the 18th, 1915. Amazingly enough is that Vicarius Filii Dei adds up to 666 in Latin, Greek and Hebrew. Daniel chapter 7 verse 25. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. Daniel chapter 7 verse 25 speaks of the saints being persecuted for 1260 years by the Catholic Church, using the prophetic day year principle. Daniel chapter 7 verse 25 predicts that the Pope will change God's law, which happened with the change of the fourth commandment expanding Constantine's civil decree, the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday. One of the biggest misconceptions is that Sunday is the seventh day of the week, when in fact the seventh day is Saturday. One only needs to look on your mobile phone or calendar to see which comes first, or just look it up on the internet. Sunday is in fact the first day of the week. Revelation chapter 7:25 also predicts that the Pope will change times. That happened as well. The Gregorian calendar, also called the Western calendar in the Christian calendar, is internationally the most widely used civil calendar. It is named for Pope Gregory XIII, who introduced it in 1582. Revelation chapter 13 verse 15. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak, and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. This simply states that the Vatican gives power unto the image of the beast, which is the United States of America in the form of apostate Sunday-keeping Protestantism, to persecute anyone opposed to the New World Order. Venerable Day of the Sun. Revelation chapter 14 verse 10. The same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation, and he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels, and in the presence of the Lamb. Revelation chapter 14 verse 11. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up for ever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, who worship the beast in his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. Revelation chapter 20 verse 4. And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus, and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark on their foreheads or in their hands, and they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. In recent times, the drugs used for state executions have not always been readily available, and it is probable that the guillotine which Revelation chapter 20 verse 4 describes will make a comeback. Roman Catholic Clarence Thomas I believes that the Constitution left religion to the states, that the First Amendment's prohibition against Congresses enacting laws on the establishment of religion was intended to protect the right of states to do as they please. It is evident Clarence Thomas is Vatican coadjutor. The intent and motive of his views is so that states in America enact blue laws that are already on the book of some US states. Blue laws are laws designed to enforce religious standards, such as the institution of Sunday keeping. The book of Daniel, chapter 2, gives a prophetic outline of kingdoms that will reign on earth. Daniel 2:31-35. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut off without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so that no place was found for them, and the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. The head of gold represents the kingdom of Babylon. The chest and arms of silver represent the kingdom of the Medes and Persians. His belly and thighs of brass represent the kingdom of ancient Greece. The legs of iron represent the Roman Empire, and the feet of iron and clay represent the mingling of churchcraft and statecraft, legislating the spurious Sunday as the Sabbath influenced by the Papacy, which is simply a continuation of the Roman Empire represented by the iron. The stone that smote the feet of the image is the second coming of Jesus Christ, and the mountain is the kingdom which God will set up that lasts forever. A mountain represents a kingdom, authority, or rule. Psalm 30 verse 7, Isaiah 2 verse 2, Daniel 44 and 45, Revelation 17 verses 9 to 11. The metals in the statue of Nebuchadnezzar could also be said to represent facets of the last empire, the New World Order, the amalgamation of philosophies and ideologies of each kingdom. Babylonian sun worship, the Medes and Persians represent irreversible decrees as well as worship of a sun god. Greece represents democracy, human reasoning through philosophy, including evolution through Aristotle, as well as communism via Plato. Rome represents persecution, sun worship, and structure of the Roman Empire as a model of the New World Order. All these characteristics will be interwoven in the last empire. Revelation chapter 17 verses 12 to 13. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. Revelation chapter 17 verse 12 states that 10 kings will arise that will give power to the Vatican for a short space of time before the coming of Jesus Christ. We can see that trading blocs like GAFTA, NAFTA, and the European Union are rising throughout the world, and it is possible that these 10 kings represent the leaders of those unions that will give power to the Pope. On the 17th of September 1973, the Club of Rome published a report entitled The Regionalized and Adaptive Model of the Global World System, which was authored by Edward Pestel and Mahajlo Mesarovic. The report revealed the club's intention to divide the world into 10 economic political regions called kingdoms, which would unite the entire world under a common leadership. These regions are North America, Western Europe, Japan, Australia and South Africa, Eastern Europe, Latin America, North Africa and the Middle East, Main Africa, South and Southeast Asia, South and Southeast Asia, Centrally Planned Asia. As we speak, there are 10 economical world regions: NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Association; SAFTA, South Asian Free Trade Area; AFTA, ASEAN Free Trade Area; CEFTA, Central European Free Trade Agreement; KISFTA, 8 CIS member states; CAMISA, Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa; GAFTA, Greater Arab Free Trade Area; GCC, Cooperation Council for the Arab States of the Gulf, SICA, Central American Integration System, TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. These blocks might be adjusted and fine-tuned somewhat, but the Bible states that 10 kings will arise and give power unto the beast. These trading blocks give a basic outline, but by no means the final representation of the 10 kings.
So anyway, getting back to the Federal Reserve and the Bank for International Settlements, these groups are in cahoots with the biggest crooks of all, the Jesuits that bought up Bank of America, and they have little secret deals to try to apportion the riches of the world. And in the meantime,
the Vatican has large investments with the Rothschilds of Britain, France and America, and with the Hambros Bank, the Credit Suisse in London and Zurich. In the United States, it has large investments with the Morgan Bank, the Chase Manhattan Bank, the First National Bank of New York, the Bankers Trust Company, and others. The Vatican has billions of shares in the most powerful international corporations such as Gulf Oil, Shell, General Motors, Bethlehem Steel, General Electric, International Business Machines, TWA, etc. At a conservative estimate, these amount to more than $500 million in the US alone. Avro Manhattan wrote the Vatican Billions 32 years ago, and the Vatican is still maintaining absolute secrecy about its wealth, hiding behind such offshore companies as British Grulux Limited that manages the Vatican's London property portfolio, said to be worth around 570 million euros. British Grulux Investments' two nominee shareholders are listed as John Varley, former chief executive of Barclays Bank, and Robin Herbert, one of the many Catholic bankers. Managed share portfolios most often include shares in arms manufacturers, and Avro Manhattan pointed out the Vatican has shares in General Electric, the third biggest arms producer next to Lockheed and Boeing. General Electric produced the Gatling gun, among other weapons or parts. But because the Vatican hides its assets in secret behind the names of other companies, it is hard to trace exactly what companies they've invested in and how many shares they actually have. Pope Benedict XVI stated that the Vatican did not incur any losses in the 2007 to 2008 financial crisis. And there's very good reason for this. Rome is, or will be, soon controlling the world economy, for it is prophesied. Rome, the Vatican, is the new Babylon. Thanks to Edward Snowden, the world is now aware of the ubiquitous surveillance perpetrated by Roman Catholics who have infiltrated the highest levels of US government, including the NSA, CIA and FBI. The directors of these agencies are all Roman Catholics, and the US-Vatican merger is spying on the world, including industrial espionage. World business is simply a giant poker game so the US-Vatican can see everyone's cards before every hand. Information is power, and the NSA, CIA and FBI have all the information at their fingertips, passing the info to their chosen cronies. Not only industrial espionage, but the Vatican has knowledge of United States foreign policy as well, even before it happens from intelligence agencies and such US elite outposts such as Council on Foreign Relations and the Bilderberg Group, of which one of the founders was a crypto Jesuit, Joseph Ratzinger. The Vatican uses proxies like Goldman and Sachs. Jesuits love using Jews as fronts, such as the Rothschilds, and the long list of other Jewish bankers, including Federal Reserve chairmen such as Greenspan, Bernanke, and Janet Yellen, in the same ingenious way that the Protocols of Zion document was used to take the heat off the Jesuits and onto the Jews, so are the Jesuits hiding behind the Jewish bankers as ultimately all roads lead to Rome. Revelation chapter 18 describes Rome as the head of the world economy after the 10 kings give power onto the beast, the Pope, in prophecy. The symbolism used is very simple. Ships represent economic might, chariots would represent automobiles, trucks, trains and the like. As it also mentions slaves, the business of human trafficking will increase until the second advent of Christ. Slavery experts believe that there is nowhere in the world where people are legally shackled, beaten and sold as if they were property. But the ILO's report 2012 Global Estimate of Forced Labour estimates that already 20.9 million people are victims of forced labour. Revelation chapter 18 verses 10 to 19. Standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more. The merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones, and of pearls and fine linen, and purple and scarlet, and all thine wood, and all manner vessels of ivory, and all manner vessels of most precious wood, and of brass, and iron, and marble, and cinnamon, and odours, and ointments, and frankincense, and wine, and oil, and fine flour, and wheat, and beasts, and sheep, and horses, and chariots, and slaves, and souls of men. And the fruits that thy soul lusted after are departed from thee, and all things which were dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. The merchants of these things, which were made rich by her, shall stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city, that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught, and every shipmaster, and all the company in ships, and sailors, and as many as trade by sea, stood afar off, and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like unto this great city? And they cast dust on their heads, and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, that great city, wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness. For in 1 hour is she made desolate.
To know this, the Obama administration is preparing to sell America out to a handful of private corporations. Well, more than a handful, but anyhow, that's because right now President Obama is preparing to push through the largest trade deal in human history, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or as it's more commonly known, the TPP. If approved, the TPP would create a whole new set of rules regulating the economies of 12 countries. The red countries seen here on 4 different continents bordering the Pacific Ocean. These rules cover everything from pharmaceuticals to digital copyright law and could permanently change the way everyday Americans and people all over the world interact with the global economy. So if you think the Obama administration, you would think, as a result of this, that the Obama administration would want to keep the public as up to date as possible on such a big trade deal, right? Wrong. The United States has negotiated the TPP almost entirely in secret with the help of about 600 private corporations. Most of what we know about it actually comes from leaked documents, and those documents paint a pretty scary picture. Now, thanks to WikiLeaks, we have an even better idea of just how dangerous the TPP really is. Earlier today, WikiLeaks released a full draft of the treaty's intellectual property rights chapter. The 95-page document proves what many people have long suspected, that the TPP isn't so much a free trade deal as it is a giant giveaway to monster transnational corporations. According to WikiLeaks, the TPP would allow private foreign corporations to sue countries over regulations that those corporations don't like. It would allow them to expand the monopoly powers of pharmaceutical patents, and it would also give corporations the go-ahead to start blocking websites accused of violating copyright law. The documents also show that the Obama administration, on behalf of the United States, has been pushing for some of the TPP's harshest intellectual property laws. To put it bluntly, the TPP would sacrifice national sovereignty, public health, and internet freedom, all in the name of helping private corporations keep their CEOs' wallets fat and their shareholders happy. That's why the TPP is so much more dangerous than normal trade deals like NAFTA or CAFTA. Not only does it reward companies that send jobs overseas and gut regulations that keep big businesses in check, it also increases corporate control over pretty much every part of how you and I interact with the world, and makes it near impossible for countries to fight back against giant corporations. As Julian Assange said about the leaked documents, if instituted, The TPP's intellectual property regime would trample over individual rights and free expression, as well as ride roughshod over the intellectual and creative commons. If you read, write, publish, think, listen, dance, sing, or invent, if you farm or consume food, if you're ill now or one day might be ill, the TPP has you in its crosshairs. In other words, it puts the rights of profit-driven businesses over the rights of human beings and the governments that we form to protect ourselves. No wonder then that the Obama administration doesn't even want Congress to take a closer look at the TPP. To push the U.S. into the proposed treaty as soon as possible, the president is trying to use a special legislative trick called fast-tracking that would prevent lawmakers from making any amendments to the TPP. Instead, the treaty would be sent right to the floor, where it would only have to pass a simple majority vote. Sounds like a done deal, right? Well, not so fast. A growing number of bipartisan lawmakers, including people as far away from each other on the political spectrum as Michelle Bachmann and John Lewis, are banding together to fight back against the president's TPP plan. They're calling for an open debate on the treaty and have asked the Obama administration to hold back on pushing for fast-track powers. So, will they succeed? And what's the deeper story here? For more on this, I'm joined now by Mike Papantonio, attorney and host of Ring of Fire Radio, Ring of Fire Television. Pap, welcome back.
Tom, how are you?
Just great. Hey, as I just mentioned, there's growing congressional opposition to both the TPP and President Obama's decision to try to reauthorize fast track to pass this thing, which a power that he doesn't have right now. It expired in 2008, as I recall. Do you think today's WikiLeaks revelations are going to help, hurt? How what effect are they going to have on all this?
They are extremely important because what the American public sees now, and this is going to take the same shape that we saw with Syria, with Larry Summers, with the pipeline, XL pipeline. You're going to see so much anger about this once people understand what has been happening to them behind closed doors. It's so secretive, as a matter of fact, that even the people working on it had to sign a classified information non-disclosure agreement, and that's how he's kept it secret. But real problematic is, why would a president that runs on the idea of being the people's candidate want to keep this so quiet when it puts so many people out of jobs and is such a huge threat to every facet of the American public? Why would he want to keep that secret? That's the big question. I think I know the answer.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm guessing for you that's not a rhetorical question. What do you think the answer is?
Well, I think it all comes down to the fact that we saw the same thing happen with Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was surrounded by the Robert Rubin types, by the Penny Pritzker types, by the Wall Street types. That's where Bill Clinton's money came from. We have ignored the fact that Obama came up the same way. It's simply a continuation of what we saw with the Bill Clinton administration, with NAFTA and CAFTA. Now he has made promises. There's nothing else you can read into this. He's made promises. He had to make promises in order to get elected, to get all that money from Wall Street, and now it's payback time. Wall Street had the good sense to understand there's no way that anybody with a brain and a gag reflex could ever put up with this type of legislation or this type of treaty, so he kept it quiet, intentionally tried to hide it from the American public and the press.
I think one of the most interesting parts of this is, well, actually, the only part that we really know right now is this intellectual property part. But that's, both damning and fascinating. I'm curious your thoughts about the revelation, probably the biggest revelation in this, was that it's the United States who's pushing hardest for this. It seems to me like I'm seeing the hand of Microsoft and Disney and Sony and whatnot behind this, but maybe the pharmaceutical companies. I mean, that's an area that you
big time.
Super specialize in. Your thoughts?
Big time. Well, what has happened is Exxon, DuPont, Dow Chemical, Eli Lilly, Merck, all the big companies have already had great success just gaming the system and taking away sovereignty by way of NAFTA. NAFTA is very weak where it comes for a foreign entity's right to come in and change a sovereign law. TPP puts NAFTA on steroids. But already we've seen the oil companies force people in Canada that said, you know, we don't want you drilling in our backyard. They've been forced, they've been sued, and the legislation that prevents that drilling has been thrown to the side. Same way with fracking, same way with pricing of pharmaceuticals. This is a complete takeover of what we hold so dearly, and that's the right for us to be able to govern ourselves, Tom. And really, this is the last stage, if this were to succeed, this is the last stage of making the United States into something akin to Saipan in this sense. It creates what we call job scarcity. If you have 20 people that are applying for the same job, the employer is able to say, no, we're not going to honor OSHA. We're not going to honor regulations. We're not going to pay a minimum wage. We're not going to allow for unionization. And all of a sudden, the person right behind that guy applying for the job says, well, I'll take the job. Look, when you take regulations away, when you let corporations get involved in interfering with sovereign regulations and sovereign laws, it always works to the benefit of the corporation. That's the gotcha. That's the gotcha part of this whole thing. That's where it's headed. Obama knows it. He's not an idiot. He simply is owned and operated by Wall Street. And it's hard to admit it, but that's the guy we elected, and now we're seeing it. This is a telltale of what this man really is all about. Why else would he keep it a secret?
What's the word on when this thing is going to drop?
Well, I think at this point it's going to be slowed down dramatically. That what's going to happen is they have to get this through with Obama. He has to be the guy, because there's a good possibility that Hillary won't be able to do it. Hillary's going to be running for cover as she sees this pendulum swing and progressives get more and more involved with saying, you know, damn it, we're tired of centrist politics. We're tired of Democrats acting like damn Republicans. And Hillary, you better not stand behind this. So Obama is the last chance they have. They're going to put full tilt, full speed behind this thing every way they can. And the only thing that's going to stop it, Sam, the only thing that's going to stop Tom, is people like you and me, and Sam, who I was talking about, does radio show with me, and Bobby Kennedy, and the people that are out in the media. That is not mainstream media, but the citizens' media. They're going to stop this. This is where the real anger is going to come in.
Yeah, 30 seconds, Pap. There's absolute radio silence in the corporate media on this. Why?
Oh, they want it. This is great for corporate media. It sells more goods. Anytime you sell more goods, advertisers are happy, and the guys on the 50th floor with that MBA that could not care less about the future of this country, they make more bonus money.
Yeah, incredible. Mike Papantonio, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Tom.
And I think